Welcome to the Thinking Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, it's our great privilege today to be joined in the studio by Mr. Danny Fairbrass, and it has to be said, after something of a break, Dan, we are going to talk about the long-awaited Elstow Pits episode, a place I think that was really, really quite fundamental in your angling, and certainly one of the most, one of your favourite lakes you've ever fished, I think.
It still is my favourite lake in the UK ever. Yeah, so an amazing period of my fishing. I look back at it with very, very fond memories. So it'd be a nice trip down memory lane. It's a long time ago, so I apologise to all the Elstow members if I don't know the names of the fish. I think it will come clear that I wasn't part of the clique back then. I wasn't part of the. I certainly wasn't one of the Elstow mafia. I was the one of the people that they looked down their noses at. But yeah, there was a real culture on there, and an amazing group of anglers, amazing fish in an amazing lake. So yeah, I'm sure people are going to really love it.
Paint us a picture, Dan, because you've touched on it there. This place had a fearsome reputation,
yes,
and the anglers were mostly local, very, very protective. Protective of
very
what?
Protective of probably the biggest head of 30-pounders in the country back in the day, with a big head of 40s as well. That wasn't actually a lot of money, and I've talked to some of these guys since, and they're like, if we publicise anything, it's just going to get more expensive. The syndicate, I think it was when they first started, it was like 200 quid or 250 quid or something for the season, and it had loads of 30s in it. Then this is sort of, I'm guessing you probably know better than me, late 80s would it have been?
Yeah,
something like that. But it was a super famous circuit water. We say was because it's been drained down now, if people don't know the lake. Elstow in Bedfordshire. And it had a fearsome reputation with both the savage nature of the lake because of the features in it and the precision under which you had to fish, and also the anglers fishing it, because it's one of them places that if you listen to the rumours, you wouldn't have put your name down. Certainly in my position of being in the public eye, you would have not have put your name down through fear of the bullying that would probably happen and the unpleasant atmosphere when you got in. As is almost always the case, the reality is wildly different from what you're told. Oh, mate, you don't want to get a ticket on there. There's this geezer and that geezer and da-da-da, and he got thrown out and he got completely ignored, and he only lasted a week and all that sort of thing. And the reality actually is very rarely like that, I was massively intimidated when I first went on there.
Rewind us a little bit though, Dan.
Yeah.
How did you become aware of it, and secondly, what was the kind of process through which you thought, do you know what, I live in Essex, you live in London, or sort of East London,
yes, I'm
going to put my name down for this lake in Bedfordshire?
So I'd heard about it through Carp World, and just like everybody, and Carp Talk, it was the Beds Clay Pit, wasn't it?
Famously, yeah.
The famous Beds Clay Pit and you just look at it and go, look at that. Oh my God, it's deeper than it is long, just gnarly looking grey things, some with big patches of scale, some not, but they had a very distinct look. I think the Elstow Pit one fish, very distinct look. Heart-shaped tails, all of them, then rounded tails, just all mirrors, exactly my kind of carp, and prior to that, I would have said, I think it took me 3 or 4 years to get in. You had to buy an Elstow Pit 2 ticket at that point, but because it was run by Len Gerd, God bless his soul, lovely Len, who at the time was running Linear, and I'd fished at Linear a lot and done filming at Linear. I'd done filming with Len as well, but there was no jump in the queue. All he allowed me to do was have a Pit 2 ticket, because no one wanted to fish Pit 2 back then. There was a handful of carp in there, a couple of real big uns. That was well beyond me. Like, there's no way I was going on there. That was man's fishing. I was not ready for that at that stage. Whatever it was. Do you know how many carp it was in Pit 2 in
I feel like there was
30
either 8
acres.
or 12 or something.
Yeah,
wasn't
so
there?
I thought 9 came
Yeah.
to mind. But mega fish, absolutely mega fish. And if that was that lake today, I'd be on there, you know. But yeah, because people didn't want to join Pit 2, I could have a Pit 2 ticket without paying, and sat on that for whatever it was, 4 or 5 years, and then got offered a Pit 1 ticket. And Pit 1 was basically you could fish whenever you wanted during the week, but the weekends were rotated, weekend on, weekend off, and there was 2 rotors, A and B, and you had the rotor with the so-called Elstow Mafia on it, who still I don't really know all their names, and then you had the other rotor, you know. I can't even remember what rotor I was on. I never did a rotor, never fished at the weekends ever.
Really? You never drew the pound coin out the bag?
No, never did that, because I don't fish at weekends anyway, and there was no way it would be like throwing a penguin in the lion's den, me turning up on a Friday morning, you know, to do that would not have been a pleasant experience. So I decided I'd just do my thing. I'd go down during the week, keep myself to myself, not ask any questions of anybody, because it's so full of features that if you don't know where to cast, you are literally pissing in the wind. You know, it's like deep, 15, 18, 20 foot deep, covered in silkweed, other than that one little spot that's the size of this table that goes donk, that's in 8 foot, and you've got to squeeze all 3 rods onto it. And if you don't know where that is, you can cast all day long, because every cast you're getting completely snarled up in silkweed, or green eels, as they call it. This is the thing about Elstow. Every swim's got a name. Every feature in every swim's got a name. And every type of weed's got a name. Every angler's got a name. You know, they've got everyone's got a nickname. You probably know what my nickname is. I still don't know what my nickname is to this day. Yeah, it's just full of real characters that absolutely make the place as anglers, and obviously everybody gets named by that group of people, you know. And yeah, it really was a law unto itself.
Before we dive too deep into how you tackled this place, give us a bit of context, Dan, as to what kind of angler you were then. What was Korda doing then? What was your work like then? How are you fitting this in around your life?
So I'd chosen a long time ago to take part of the success of Korda in time rather than in money. So I would carry on doing my weekday fishing. I'd normally do Monday, Tuesday night, maybe stretch it to Wednesday night if I was on a good run or the weather was good or whatever. So I'd do 2 to 3 nights a week during the week. There was, you know, there wasn't I wasn't doing the amount of work on a phone or an iPad that I am now when I'm fishing, but I could still work from the bank. I certainly wasn't going to do any publicity there. You couldn't actually name the lake anyway, and there was no filming allowed on there. But I certainly wasn't going to use it for Korda's purposes.
Do you think that people expected that you might?
Oh, almost certainly, yeah. You know, I mean, apparently there were 2 groups of anglers on Elstow at that point: the ones who wear T-shirts and the ones who don't wear T-shirts, which meant the ones who have got a logo on their T-shirt are in the trade, and the ones who wear Umbro tracky bottoms, you know, and a blue T-shirt covered in paint because they're a painter or whatever, you know, and their Reebok Classics or whatever they went fishing in, and then the ones like us that were head to toe in fishing kit, you know, and we were the bottom of the food chain. We were the krill, you know. They were the blue whales. We were the krill.
Yeah.
You know, and there wasn't many others like me on the syndicate fishing at the same time as me. There might have been weekend people doing that, but for the most part, anybody that fished on there morphed into their way of life and their way of fishing very, very quickly. Otherwise, they made it so uncomfortable for you that you went, you know. So yeah, Korda was forging ahead. What are we, you know, 2000 and what was the date?
7 was it?
Yeah, I think 2006 was, I think, when I got in. As an angler, I'd been fishing Mercers. I'd also fished Frimley in between, and that was Frimley really set me up for Elstow because Mercer's was all braid fishing, floating braid as well, at long range, thin braid to get out there. I took that to Frimley, and it was like having an invisible force field around my swim. Little tiny lake, clear water, bright green, floating braid going right through the middle of the swim. Never caught anything, and had to move from that to fluorocarbon, which was like one extreme to the other, with regards wiriness and all that sort of thing, but sunk like a brick. Still the original £12 contour that we sell today. And that's what I took on to Elstow. So I'd already been fishing 2 rods on a spot or 3 rods on a spot for quite a long time before that. That was my sort of style, bait and weight sort of fishing. It really played into my, it suited Elstow. That was what was already being done there, scratching the marker float, as they call it, where they're fishing literally all 3 rods, even tighter than I would fish. All 3 lines are all pointing together. I found all this out later, not when I was fishing it, but because I'm mates with the guys, some of the guys that ran it and stuff now. We can talk about it now because we're not competing for bites, and you sort of you find out more about it. But yeah, it was bit fishing, little tiny hook baits, absolutely perfect. To follow on from Frimley to that was a good transition.
Yeah, you're made for that fishing, aren't you? At that point, that's exactly where in the crosshairs of what you're doing.
Exactly.
Now, the one thing that we need to get across in some degree of detail, Dan, is what makes Elstow, I would say, almost unique in UK fishing.
Yeah,
I don't think I know of anywhere else within which the features have affected the angling to the degree that they have on Elstow. To the point where people didn't really plumb around because there was no plumbing round. You fished in this swim, there in this swim.
Yeah.
In a way, that's the degree of sort of almost equality available, because you're just going to follow the guide and fish in the same spot. So it's what your rigs are like, what your baiting's like.
Yeah,
you're not going to pioneer it, Dan, are you?
You're not going to pioneer it, but I wouldn't say there was equality because the standard of angler was so good on there. That was the other thing. It made you better. I remember Tim Fromont, bless him, who I've been speaking to a fair bit recently, I remember him because I knew him from the matches, when we were fishing in the BCACs. I knew him from there. Always the loveliest guy, teacher, really personable, funny, he'd been in Elstow quite a long time before I was, and he went, Dan, you're going to be doing loads of pictures for other people. Just, get used to it.
Red rag to a bull for you, that surely, Dan.
No, I mean, that probably intimidated me even
really?
More, but he's like, there are loads of good anglers on there. Don't expect to be in the game at the start, expect to be spectating, and he was right. It was I didn't fish with one bad angler on there. I really didn't. Everybody really knew their trade, and I didn't see the weekend warriors. I didn't see much of them. In hindsight, and this is something I would say to people that are getting in a new syndicate now, the massive mistake I made is not doing the rotors, because on a Friday, whatever the time the draw was, they used to do the draw
like 10 in the morning
early or something to make it hard for people to have Friday. You had to have Friday off. You couldn't go to work and do half a day and then go for the draw. You had to have the whole day off, which meant less people turned up for the rotor. But if you'd turned up and not even gone in the rotor and just walked around and looked at where all the marker floats were, that was all the spots on day one. You could have seen every spot in every swim. And I did that by looking at where people were casting and lining it up with the trees. Like a bloke on the opposite bank, right, he's casting out there, looking up on what trees he casting at, right, okay, he's casting at that one, right. When he's gone, I'm going to go around to his swim and look at the trees and have a cast around and see if I can find what he was casting at, because I wouldn't dare ask him. You could have, on a Friday, got all that information in 2 or 3 hours and written down what they were aiming at, roughly how far it was, and then you would have been on the spots, because it was absolutely key to be on the parts of the bars or the bars. We didn't know they were as extensive as they are. We thought they were just raised bits with big deep bits in between all round, like they're almost little, sort of like a pepper pot here and a pepper pot there, but it wasn't. It was a line of gravel or clay that had little raised bits within that line. Now we've seen it almost dry, but that cost me dearly at the start because I was not fishing where I should have been fishing. So. Yeah, well, the thing that makes it, to answer your thing, the thing that makes it unique, I don't know how many bars there are, but it's a clay pit. It's very deep. It's absolutely tap clear.
Amazing.
To the point of you stand on what they call the high bank. I can remember a big group of fish coming through, loads of big ones in there. There must have been, say there was 8 to a dozen fish, and they were all upper 20 to 40 pound, and they'd swim past really slowly, almost in slow motion, and it looked like there was no water there. It looked like they were just hovering like 10 foot above the weedy bottom. It was just so ridiculously clear. So you could see them every single time you went. And there were two out of bounds. You had the frog pool, which is basically at the back of a rope in one of the most popular swims called the Reeds. You could see them in frog pool. You had to walk past it. It was literally a rod length, and there they all were in a little reedy pool that was 3 rod lengths behind this rope, so completely safe area. And you could see them. And there's that one, there's that one, there's that one. If you knew what the fish were, which I didn't, but they're all big uns, all 30 pounders, proper like purpley
with that whitey back, the whitey crusty backs on them as well.
And then up the other end, you had the snags, and again you had a rope there with all sort of hawthorn bushes in the water. And if they weren't in frog pool, they were in the snags, or they're in both of them.
Let's fire up a picture, Topes, if you can find that while we talk, because. Not necessarily the drain shots, we're going to come to that, but just to give people a little bit of context for what Dan's saying. Was that the pump snag, the pump end? Yeah. Because one thing that always strikes me...
Or the pump, I suppose the pump snags you would call it, yes.
One thing that always strikes me about that part of the world, and I used to live over that way, once you get to that side of Bedford, it's kind of a bit, I would say, like Wild West, a bit rough and ready.
Yeah, I love that though.
A lot of industry.
Factories all behind it. I loved it, mate.
Those pits, Dan, full of blackthorn, dog rose. Like, if you fell off the path, God forbid,
mate, cut to ribbons. Well, you could go back. That fish going back there, Tobe. That gives you an idea of
the clarity.
There.
It is sensational, the clarity, Dan, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, it's what we all want in a way, isn't it? You'd want every carp lake to be clear, wouldn't you?
you would. And it wasn't weed to the surface. So what you've got underneath that fish is onion weed mixed in probably with a little bit of silkweed. They called that 40 weed.
40 weed, yeah.
40 weed, yeah. So if you wound in a bit of onion weed with a little bit of silkweed matted amongst it, that's 40 weed. That's what you're going to catch a big one off of.
Can't wait to talk about rigs, because I know it's obviously a huge passion of yours, but they were so different on this lake, and I'll tell you about one that I saw.
Right, okay.
But you can see on almost the details on that fish's flank. Then is that clear?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, just that's obviously a fish going back. That's one.
Who would have taken that for you? You weren't self-taking pictures.
I took that.
You did as well. You put it back and then ran round.
Exactly. Yeah. Went in, and I think
multitasking.
It probably hung about, and mate, I was young and keen.
Stuck his head
I
in
was
the
young
weed
and keen then, and
he's done his own returners.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Find us the picture of the Google Earth of the lake, Tope. So if you go to
not the other shots, we had a Google Earth one, yeah.
Yes, just to orient ourselves in terms of the way the pit's laid out, because we're still going to put flesh on the bones of what the space looks like.
Yeah, I mean it's 20 odd acres, a long oblong sort of shape. Great, you could they had a bench up for one of the members who died suddenly. What was his?
Steve Watson? Was it Steve Watson?
It was, yes. Yeah. Sorry, Watto, yeah. So there's a fish called Watto's as well. I wasn't fishing it when he was fishing it, but I knew him from the matches. He was a mainline sponsored guy, wasn't it? Really nice
good
guy.
Angler, yeah.
Really good angler, yeah. And,
like you said, one of those venues that produced good or attracted good anglers.
Attracted good anglers, honed good anglers. It definitely honed me, there's no doubt about it. But his bench was in the car park, and you could turn up early in the morning and sit on his bench and look down the whole length of the lake, and you would see them showing somewhere down the lake, and they'd be on that feature or that feature or that feature. And then, because if it wasn't your rota weekend, then you couldn't start until 10 o'clock Monday. So there was a draw effectively Monday. If it was your rota weekend, you could just start fishing, because you're already allowed to be there. So if it wasn't your rota weekend, you'd be sitting there knowing where they are, hoping that nobody else is going to turn up before 10 o'clock. So you didn't have to choose between you, because everybody knew where they were, because everyone was a good angler. There was no, there was no hiding it. And they were very vocal fish. They're very showy carp, which you do tend to find on deep lakes that have got.
Apologies, you're gonna have to drive me in. There's a few in the area.
Okay, where are we? This doesn't look right. This is not right. You need to go to Elstow. If you put in Elstow.
Have you put Bedford in then, mate? Yeah, no, you got to put Elstow, mate.
Yeah, go on. Let's have a look. That one, that'll do us, mate. Yeah, there they are.
There it is.
Okay, so the right hand. Is
That's
that
it, that
one, the
one
one you're on? Yeah.
This one here,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't a million.
One thing you don't see, Dan, with this is that, like I touched on that, the sheer geography of these places. Like, this is quite a deep hole in the land, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're in.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long way from the road to the water's edge, down, and they're deep lakes as well. I mean, the deeps went down to at least 25 foot. Yeah.
And Pit 2 even deeper. I think mid-30s, isn't it?
And what
Pit 2 even
Pit
deeper?
2,
as well.
I believe so. Yeah, I've only fished Pit 2 once, so I don't know enough about that one really to comment. But Pit 1 didn't have tons of mature trees around it. All these sort of hawthorn bushes and and sort of smaller trees. It's very raw. Damien hated it. I think Damien went once,
right?
And I'd been raving about it because I'd already done a couple of seasons. He got in. Really didn't like it. I think he went once and said, "Oh no, the factories in the background and all that." I'm like, "Mate, I love it.
Yeah, you see,
I love all
the
that
sort of like sunset illuminating the plumes of stuff that come out of
exactly.
those chimneys.
Yeah. I just completely fell in love with it. I knew I was going to love it, waiting for a ticket, and I loved it a million times more when I got my ticket.
So let's talk about how you progressed then, because obviously we need to really analyse this idea that you set foot on this lake. And just to cast out is quite a big deal, and you don't know where the heck these features are. How do you begin? You've said you've lined them up, but I feel like there's got to be more to it than that, Dan.
No, I hadn't lined anything up at that point.
It would have taken you forever to find them that way.
It did take you forever. You just cast out, and it was just into the abyss, and just loads of silkweed around it. You just kept casting around. I can't remember if. I think I did get tipped off of approximate ranges and approximate angles.
But these aren't even wraps at this stage, are they?
No, there's no wraps at that point. No, it's turns of the reel.
Right.
I had the Entos, the Daiwa Ento reels at the time with the fluorocarbon on, and it was 56 turns or 75 turns. All the spots. It was funny how many swims had spots at the same range. Dotted around the lake, and how close range it was. It was 40 to 70 yards, the whole lot of it. Other than the point swim, there's a bar called the Haggler out in front of the point swim that I never caught a fish off of, which was longer, was about 90 yards, and the bar was slightly deeper. I fished it, but never caught a fish off of that. And then the reed swim was like the banker swim, was like
quite controversial, Dan.
Yeah, snaggy. You lose a lot of fish in it. You've got to be on your rods, and everybody rushes for it. Very one-dimensional, flicking it over to the reeds and letting it drop as straight as you possibly can, so it's dropping right next to the reeds. You'd have a little clear strip of clay, a foot or two wide, and then short of that, the onion weed will start, and you'd know from your drop arm in the onion weed, I've got to go a little bit closer, and you hit the clip and put the rod towards the rig so that it's trying to drop as straight as possible. Slotting two rods, a couple of foot apart, and then maybe another rod somewhere else. And that's where I caught my first fish from, because it was you were casting over to a far margin rather than just casting out into nothingness.
It's a bit of a comfort blanket of a swim if you're turning up on a lake like that, because you can
yeah,
see
what
you've got to do.
It was an easy win.
Yeah.
It was an easy win. It was an easy win to get the bites. I wouldn't say it was an easy win to land them.
If that was your lake, would you have had fishing from that spot?
Oh yeah, definitely.
It was
it
safe.
wasn't. It was safe. It was safe. It wasn't. It was. Fish locked up, pick up into it, walk back, and they're all brilliant anglers on there. Remember,
Yeah.
so if you got cut off, you were unlucky. I think you had either you had a little bit more slack out than you thought, or the fish was more angry, or whatever, and charged off and did you. But I don't think I ever got cut off in there. But not that I got. As soon as I like open water fishing, and as soon as I found the spots in open water, I never went back in the reeds. And it was also sort of frowned upon a little. It was like a last resort type swim, and if you caught them out the reeds, it didn't count as much as catching them out in open water.
Yeah.
So I caught my first 2 or 3 fish out of the reeds that first year. I didn't catch anything in open water at all, but I didn't go many times. And then the following year, that's when I pinpointed some spots in open water, that I'd seen other people catch off of. And then I was away then.
I quite like this idea that you're in the bushes, like lining up someone's float. Like when you see an opportunity, I guess it's inevitable. That's how you've got to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, it's so frustrating trying to find the areas because you can just cast out 50 times.
How big are these spots, Dan?
In reality, they're much bigger than we think
Right.
they are. We think they're the size of this table, 6 foot long by 4 foot deep. They're probably 4 times that size,
Right.
really. You must have seen it, Rich, when you go out in the boat, you find a spot from the bank, you're able to go out in the boat and have a look, and it's much bigger normally than you think it is, and you're not where you thought you were on it, so it's a good job we can't see a lot of the time, I think, because otherwise it'd fry your brain. But they needed finding, and seeing other people catch, that was the thing, like seeing people catching fish off of an area, and then them doing an overnighter during the week, knowing they're coming back to do the rotor at the weekend. They've got to go to work, so I can I can pinpoint they've gone, I can wind in, I can go round to where they are. And it's more out of desperation than anything else,
I mean, the rest of the syndicate, if they've been on there a little while, would know all the spots anyway. So it's
well, if you became one of the gang, and you were as anti the people who wore t-shirts as everybody else, and and you talk the talk and everything else, then you get shown that, but you obviously have to put yourself in that situation first. There was a map. I didn't know there was a map, but there was a map of all the features. And as I left, Bailey got a ticket, and Bailey had the map before he even started fishing it, I believe. Such as Bales, and he's got in with the right people and played the game. And all credit to him for I never saw the map the whole time I fished there.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a fast track to the features, and
and what we know now is that these features are extensive.
Yes.
So actually, the bits that we're talking about that you're fishing are those that are simply kept clear by the actions of anglers and fish.
Yes, yeah, and they didn't stay clear all the time. One year, one had weed over completely, and what was an absolute banker was just Mate, it was so weird on there. They get caught off the same spots over and over and over and over again, like to the point where if you were in the swim next door, you were just spectating. That you were not going to catch them off of that area because they were getting caught off of Stick Plateau rather than off of Corner Knuckle or whatever. It was Corner Knuckle and Bottom Knuckle with the 2 swims round, and then it'd be Hippos. That was the spot in Corner Knuckle. They'd all be getting caught off of hippos, and if you didn't get in hippos, you might scratch one, but they would show in between the 2 features. So they'd show in between Stick Plateau and what they called First Bar. They'd show in between those 2. They'd show behind those 2, between there and where hippos was. And there was a thing called, don't know if it was called the footballs in between there.
Okay.
I'm sorry, gents that fish there and know all of these things. It's a long time ago, and I never fished those features anyway. But they'd show sort of near those features, but in deep water. But they'd always get caught off of stick plateau. They wouldn't get caught off of hippos, and then it'd swap round, and hippos would do a load of bites, and they were pack fish. It was great because you'd catch one, they'd move out into open water, you'd be able to get some more bait out, and then they'd start showing near the feature again. You get another one.
Exciting
it was so exciting.
Having spoken to people who fished it as well, Dan,
I loved it because, like I say, they were so vocal, the fish, and you knew you were going to get one. If you were on that feature and they were close by, you were going to get them.
So one thing that we need to discuss is early in your fishing there, Dan. What kind of techers are you going in with, and what's your bait mix like? Because these are two things that ended up being quite distinct on Elstow, didn't it?
Yes.
Certainly the mix,
Yeah, well, the thing was, part of the benefit of not being in with the in-crowd and not pushing, because there were people on there that I knew, and people on there that we sponsored that I didn't know, but I knew we sponsored, and I wouldn't even contact them to find out anything. I did not want to be told. I didn't want to feel like a goal hanger. Do you know what I mean? That I was using the fact we were giving a guy a bit of gear, a reason to pump him for information he'd sort of feel duty bound to tell me. I didn't want it handed to me like that. I wanted to earn it.
Was Picky on there at that time? Because
Picky was on there.
Really successful, hadn't he?
Yeah, Picky was on there, and Picky being
very open,
very open, but also not the new boy, but also not really in that sort of a bit of a bridge between the two. Because the loveliest bloke ever, totally unthreatening,
don't we?
And so he and I can't remember if I knew him from somewhere else or not, or just from being in the trade.
It's fair to say he was starting to find a bit of sort of renown in the carp talk, wasn't he? I think at the time.
He was catching them everywhere. He's a great angler. And I don't think Picky was on there loads when I was there. There was a guy, I think his name was Dave Barnett. Do you know?
No.
I think so. I'm really sorry that I can't remember the names, but he had a ponytail, and the other guy was who doesn't fish anymore, that moved on to Welly, Ian Stott.
Oh yeah.
Stotty. Stotty was he was another guy that was on there sort of regularly. I don't know if it was. I think it was the second year I fished it, not the first year. I don't know if he was on there, and I just didn't talk to him. I didn't talk to anybody the first year. I probably did 5 trips, caught on 1 or 2 of them, and that was my lot.
I've sidetracked you there, Dan. We were going to talk about the techers and the bait that
techers,
you'd come up with to fish on this lake.
Right. So this is one of the things about bait on there. So the legend goes that Thomas's dad Carl Pashley and his brother Sean, who were part of the Elstow Mafia, are arguably 2 of the greatest anglers who have ever lived. They were catching, I was told, they were catching 50 30s a year when I hadn't caught one, both of them, and from multiple lakes, and just ridiculously good, and still are ridiculously good. The legend goes that Steve Cliff, the Apache, we all know the Apache, he was in one of their swims one day and took the lid off of their little green particle bucket, which had to be a certain size, and that's what you put out, bucket of slay, as they called it, and lifted the lid on their bucket of hemp to have a look what was in, because he was convinced there was something magical in there because they caught so many fish. And they never spoke another word for 15 years or whatever, because he'd had the audacity to lift the lid on their bucket of hemp. And all the rumours of what they had in it, and were they putting chili in it, or were they putting something else in it? And there was all of that going on. I never really spoke to either of them about it, so I never, to this day, I don't know whether there was anything magical in there or not, or they were just superb using it. But it was dominated by hemp and corn. absolutely dominated. Apparently, it's one of the first places that artificial hook baits ever got used.
Right.
So they were using little tiny bits of yellow foam because there was no plastic corn at the time. And I remember somebody else saying to me they'd seen someone catch one, gone round there, and he'd not been able to get rid of the rig before he got in his swim. And there's a little bit of yellow foam hanging off the air, and he's like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, don't tell anyone," And they're critically balancing these hook baits. Big, long braided hook links.
This is what I remember from having been shown.
Big, long braided hook links, really supple hook links, with like almost dust shot on them, and the hook bait taking about 15 minutes to hit the bottom once the lead had hit the bottom. I didn't know any of this at the time.
Presumably to fish over the silkweed, right? Or was that on the hard spots as well?
I think it was because... No, this is on the hard spots. I think it was to do with the bait was so light that they were feeding. They wanted something super light that would just fly back into the fish's mouth when it was taken. Obviously, I wasn't privy to any of that. I wouldn't have fished that way anyway, even if I was privy to it. But it was the time when we had... it was hybrid soft we had at the time. You remember hybrid soft that you couldn't tie an overhand loop in it because it snapped, because it had Kevlar inside it rather than Dyneema, to get the coating on it. I mean, the coating, I remember when it first turned up, that stuff, it first came in and we got the first spools, and I was like, oh my God.
It was very matte, wasn't it?
We are going to make a fortune out of this. This is amazing stuff. But you had to tie either like a 3 or 4 turn grinner, or just what's the other one called? The very, very basic
blood knot.
Just a 3 or 4 turn blood knot, yeah. Or a Palomar in it, and really tighten it down, and then you could get the coating to not break. But if you tied an overhand loop in it, the coating broke. So, but that's when we had the link loops. Do you remember the little teardrop shaped loops? Used to tie just a 3 or 4 turn blood knot to that. So a coated hook link that was just enough to stop it tangling, a little bit stripped back by the hook, very small counterbalance, little bit of putty, and not a slow sinking hook bait, but size 8 wide gape, little bit of shrink tube, blowback ring only to force the hair away from the hook, and 2 grains of enterprise plastic. That's what I was using, or half a sticky baits bloodworm dumbbell and a bit of plastic on top of it. That was what I was using at the time.
Leg clip?
Leg clip, yeah. And then baiting, Wendy, bless her, was working at Bait Tech at the time, so we got all our particle for nothing, which was great. And their particle, and I'm sure it still is if it's cooked in the same way, was fantastic. Cooked in the pot. We managed to get a chili hemp done because we were using that in our fishing anyway, and knew it to be good. And they did like a seed mix, didn't they? Do you remember they did like an aniseedy,
like a party blend type.
Like a party blend type mix. They had some bigger bits in it, and it would be... Still got the bucket to this day. I've still got the white bucket that I covered in camouflage tape that I used to put one of the hemp, one of the party mix, and crumb boiler. We used no pellet whatsoever.
Really?
That was the other thing. They all used to use this pellet that you had to go to GM growers. I didn't know it was GM growers at the time because no one would tell me and I wouldn't ask. But you had to go to GM growers and buy the premium. Was it Premium Select? Was that what it was called?
It may have been. I don't know, Dan.
It was what are the two? There's Screttins and
Coppins.
I think it was Screttins. I think Premium Select. I think that was the one that you had to buy in 4 meals, and that's what they all used. And when I did use it, I just found the fish were massively preoccupied, and you'd get these huge slicks come up, but you wouldn't actually get any bites. So I didn't use pellet on purpose because everybody else was using pellet. I was crumbing up just cell boilie in all different sizes, loads of tuna in the mix, loads of salt in the mix as well, and that would be
quite different than Dan to the status quo on there.
Because I wasn't influenced by them because I wasn't speaking to any of them.
Were you able to read the water given the slick that would come off your mix in the same way that they could with their pellet mix?
No, not really. I would say actually my mix didn't slick up that much, and I just got bites.
Okay.
So it just go out.
Because I know how you like to see, you.
Oh yes, it is lovely, and I would, the tuna was in sunflower oil, so that added an element of it flattening the surface when you put it out, and it slicking a little bit. But I'd rather catch them than see it slicking over my spot, And the times I used pellet, I just got loads of slicking and no bites. And it was almost like they were preoccupied on little 4mm bits, and anything that you had on the end, any bigger and any heavier, just wasn't getting taken. So by having a mix, I used to put corn in it as well. So by having corn in there, and there's a bit of maize in the party mix, and there's a few maples in there, and obviously the bigger chunks of boilie, there was bigger items, and the fish weren't preoccupied on the tiny stuff. So you're still getting bites.
Now, in terms of quantity and the way that you're applying this bait, obviously the lads were using their little green bucket, and that would be their first introduction of bait, wouldn't it? They generally put one of those out.
Yes.
Did you go heavier than that? And the second thing I want to ask about this is, I'd obviously heard, I'd started in the industry a few years before that, say sort of 05 time. So, and I'd been told about the way the Elstow anglers fished, and it's like you say, it's myth and folklore.
Yes.
That they were casting without a clip and like hitting the float every time, this kind of thing.
Ridiculous, mate. It's so accurate.
But what I didn't know, Dan, and it was a complete revelation to me when I did find out, was it was all about the spods, that they could get it very, very close, but lay it down and then tease it back and then dump the load over right on the float.
Yeah, and the accuracy of these guys is just, again, I didn't see many of them fish, because fishing during the week, I was fortunate. If 3 turned up for the draw, that was a lot on a Monday morning. Often it was just one other guy, me and Stotty, or I think this guy's name was Barnett. And so you didn't really see other people fishing until I a couple of them did like a Thursday night. Sometimes they did a Thursday night.
Yeah,
exactly. Did a Thursday night. Because it was their rota Friday morning, so they'd know then what was going on. They'd do a Wednesday night or whatever, and I saw a few of them fish then. And the spods, were made out of the VO5 shampoo bottle with the pike bung in the front. Like Tim Fromont, bless him, sent me 2 spods. I wish I'd brought them in to show you. He sent me two spods in the post the other day. The original ones with the Union Jack dart flights in the back of them, that weighed nothing, and these things just on the surface just make absolutely no. Obviously, I was using a Korda spot at the time, but they made absolutely no splash. The thing was, they could, if they overcast them, they could pull them back, and then once they upended, then the bait fell out.
Could you do that with your spots? In fact, was that even on your radar? Were you just nailing them?
Not really. No, I was just spot into the float, just clipping up, and that we were fishing turns of the reel and still using the line clip. All this, just sort of casting out to the float and almost scratching it every time. That wasn't me. I needed the line clip to get as accurate as that. But yeah, my baiting up, I'd put at least half a 10 litre bucket out at the start, at least. Sometimes a whole bucket out.
4 or 5 kilos of.
Yeah, probably a whole bucket is probably more than 10 key,
right?
With the water and everything that's in the particle, it's quite heavy. So I put at least half a bucket out to start off with. This is not the first season I fished it. It was half a dozen 10 spods over each area, because you didn't really know the swim or how many bites you could expect, and it wasn't open water fishing. But when I got into the open water fishing, the stick swim was the first one that I got mapped out properly, and that was Sean Pashley, like doing an overnighter. I think he caught 330s or 230s and a 20. I'm like, oh mate, you've done well. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, like not the happiest.
Too cool for school.
Not the happiest man in the world. Yeah, too cool for school. Yeah, bless him. But that I was like, mate, that's amazing. And he's like, just sort of trudged off. But obviously I'd seen him rebaiting in the morning because he'd had bites at first light. I'm pretty sure I was on the other bank and I was looking over towards the stick, or it was the opposite way round and he was in Alcatraz and I was in the stick and looking over to where he was fishing. But I got a swim pinpointed, marked it to death when he'd gone, found out where the spot was, and then as I started to catch a few, then Steve Cliff, the Apache, bless him, he start telling me bits. You sort of had to catch a few to earn the respect in order to get told other bits, and then I'd get told more and more and more, like you do on most lakes, you catch out of 3 or 4 swims on the whole lake. You're not having them out of every single swim. You've got ones that where the spots are and you can get bites from, and if the weather conditions are similar and they're showing near there, that's where you go for, isn't it?
How do you reflect on that culture, Dan, given that you seem to be more these days about the fisheries that you have being incredibly open about wraps in swims? But there's an element
not in the swims, not in the lakes that I'm fishing full bore. I mean, I have to do it at Norton.
Yeah,
I have to do it at Norton because it's a commercial fishery, and people that go in there might only go once in the year, and you're trying to give them all the help they can get in order to get on the money. But I'd rather not tell people all the spots that I'm fishing on the lake that I'm fishing at the time.
In the way that you had to, though, serve your apprenticeship, if you like, show that you were serious, committed, and could catch them before the information started to come back to you. Do you believe that's something that's to be applauded? Or?
Definitely. I think you should earn your dues. I really do. I don't, So, Stanton, nobody knows all my marks on Stanton. Thanks very much. They don't, and they won't, I mean, it's in my phone, and I don't know their marks either, It's sort of.
Did you carry a diary back? It was presumably maybe it was pre-BlackBerry even, Dan, wasn't it? So maybe you had.
I don't know if it was pre-BlackBerry. I think it was. No, I'd written down the number of turns one way or another in every swim and what tree it was at, and I remember Apache told me about short bar in the stick swim. So you've got the stick plateau, which was 75 turns of an ento, which you could get 3 rods on, but if you fished 2 and 1 on short bar, which was a lot closer, was like 52 turns or something. But right at the far end by the pump, behind it, there was what they called the tree of 2 halves, and it basically there was a dark half of the hawthorn tree and a light half, and it's like you've got to be right down the centre of the tree of 2 halves or off the left edge of it or whatever at that range, and that was another absolutely mega spot that I caught a load of fish on. So you could have 1 rod on there and 2 rods on the plateau, and you'd almost bounce. It felt like you bounced the fish between the 2. You get a bite off of 1, respod, put that one back out again, and then the other area would go because it was only whatever it was, 20, 30 yards away, 1 rod sort of pointing off left and the other 2 pointing slightly right.
These spots, are they, when you imagine what they looked like, Dan, what were you imagining in your mind's eye, how your rigs were sitting and what were they sitting on?
Just a crest of exposed clay, maybe with some stones in it. That was that sort of creamy, browny sort of clay colour. I was massively into camouflage back then, so I remember that I was using we didn't have the dark matter tubing out, the heavy stuff, but I probably wouldn't have even used it. I was using the khaki tubing, and I got weed out of the lake. I dried it out. I crushed it in the crusher so it became dust. Okay. And then I super glued it onto the tubing in sections, so it looked like that there were bits of weed over the top of the tubing. And those 3 bits of tubing I protected with my life, and they stayed on the rods for years.
Really?
Years, mate. Yeah. All the leads, were camouflaged to that colour, so we were still coating our leads, and I'd be like, I want a bit more green in it.
You weren't, hang on a minute, Dan. As the originator of this company, the founder, you weren't doing your own leads at this point. Was Woody doing?
No, we weren't. No, I wasn't making. No,
you weren't coating them up to your own specifications.
I wasn't. No.
You were going down with a swatch and being like, "This is what I want."
I'd be going to Woody like, I want a bit more green in that. In can you just? We had like fluid hours powder beds, and I'm like, just throw a handful of green in and then dip them, so I get a green stripe going through them. And I'd pick the ones out that I wanted. Fluorocarbon hook links, like Fichter's combi links. So you'd have.
Oh, you've changed. You've changed from the hybrid soft.
Changed from the hybrid soft onto fluorocarbon. When I learned how to tie the Albright knot, I think it was, and then the Albright knot or water knot, as I used to use, formed enough of a bump that you could put the putty round it as your counterbalance.
Super neat rig.
Yeah.
What we're doing hook-wise, Dan?
Size 8 wide gates.
Small then?
Yeah,
by your standards today?
By our standards today, very clear water, and only a very, very light hook bait. I didn't know about I still don't know how they put it on the hair. You probably do know how they put it on the hair, but there'd be a piece of plastic corn on Apache and all these other people's rigs, Blue Eyes and all them people. There'd be a piece of corn, but there was no hair stop. Mm-hmm. And underneath that piece of corn was a piece of yellow foam that they used to trim down until it took 10 minutes to hit the bottom.
They'd have a little bucket. I've seen Steve do it. I can't remember how.
Yeah.
It's so useless. I can't actually remember how he does it. I've did it for something we did at Korda when I was working here.
Yeah, but how do they put it on the hair without there being a hair stop? I can't. But that they were utterly convinced that made a difference. When I talked to them about it afterwards, that the sight of the hair stop was enough to put the fish off, and you got more bites if you didn't have a hair stop on top of it. Now I still caught my fair share, and the second year, I remember I did really well. For the amount of nights that I did really well, It wasn't slowing me down.
Had you changed the mix as well, Dan? Are you still on the same mix?
No, same mix throughout. Didn't change the whole mix at all. The whole time,
so more or less. Yeah.
Yeah, the boilie might have changed. Kev made us some greenlit mussel boilie back in the day that we had made for winter fishing at Walthamstow, which is another thing that we need to talk about on another podcast.
Yeah, probably in a year or so.
So I had a bit of that, what we called the stow bait. I used that. I used hook baits of that bait and of cell as well that I made myself. I used to basically do a mix of base mix and pop-up mix, so you got a wafter basically, but I'd make them all into little misshapes. Every single one was, none of them were round. They were like sort of tapered, so they were tapered back towards, I did it with pop-ups as well, they were tapered back towards the hook, so they were wider at the end of the bait where the hair stop was, and I sort of knew if they were all roughly the same amount I pinched off, I could make them any shape and the buoyancy was right, so the hook would lay flat on the bottom and the bait would just hover above. Or if it was a pop-up mix, I knew how much pop-up I needed to create an actual pop-up where the hook was standing up. So fishing over chops, you had a sealed chop on the end because you'd moulded it. You weren't cutting bits off it to create the shape and thus allowing water to get in and the buoyancy to change. You retained the buoyancy for quite a long time, but they looked exactly like the chops and flavoured up with a bit of the extra flavour. I think New Grange was out at that time as well, and I caught quite a lot of New Grange. And those pots of pop-ups or wafters would take me hours to make. Sometimes I made them on the bank, sometimes I made them at home, and they were like gold dust, and nobody else was casting them out. Right. No one. No.
I love the DIY nature of your fishing, Dan, at this stage. I'm sure you use a lot more off the peg these days, but the idea of you being at home, like making these little hand-moulded pop-ups, getting Woody to do your leads.
Oh, mate, it's life and death, isn't it? Fishing was, and still is. I mean, yes, I am lazier now, and I've found other ways to create the same effect without having to roll anything. But I loved it. If you made a little pot of pop-ups and you put the extra glug on them and they smelt lovely and they looked perfect and they were just the right buoyancy, you're like, I'm having them. This is an edge over what other people are doing.
Yeah.
I'm catching more as a result.
Tell me about why you made the decision, how you made the decision between the hook flat on the bottom and the hook cocked like a claw. What was the differentiation in terms of the spot?
I think it was well, really it was having it over. I didn't really have it over like a claw. If it was a clear enough spot so that you weren't bringing weed back on the lead when you had a cast round, because you cast round with a marker rod first, and the spots where you got a bite from on the spot changed as well. So it might be to begin with you caught them off the top of the spot, but as it got hammered over the weeks, because loads of people would fish the same area, you'd do your 2-3 nights during the week, catch a few. Somebody might come in on Thursday and do an overnighter and catch a couple. Some weekend warrior turn up Saturday, definitely go in there because it had done bites. He'd be fishing it, and you'd either have to move left or right of the original area, so moving on to another tree on the far bank or something.
So how do you know?
Well, you just don't catch anything.
Just
like,
simple as that.
You just don't catch anything, or somebody tips you off. I've got all my bites down the back of it.
Now,
but
and these spots, did they change in depth as well? They domed?
Yeah, they were domed. Yeah, so depending on what way round they were, they might dome off to the back right hand corner, or they might be a perfect slope off the back of it, and you could get 3 rods, sort of down the back of the slope. But it was trial and error. You wouldn't catch anything. You'd have a frustrating session where they're showing on you and you're not caught anything, and then you'd find out from somebody else that had caught that they had theirs, or you wouldn't find out from that guy, but you'd find out from somebody else that guy caught them down the back in 13 foot, not 9 foot.
Right.
And then you'd
so there was dramatic a difference as that, 9 to 13, for instance.
Yeah. In like a rod length.
So you're really hanging them off the back.
Yeah.
Hanging off a feature.
Yeah, well, you can imagine them big uns coming out of deep water or swimming around over the deep water, and like feeding on that slope must be really easy. They almost haven't got to upend, have they?
Yeah.
So it wasn't sheer, but it was where you fished on the spots was critical.
Fantastic for concealment of your rig, presumably, as well.
If you're fishing down the back of something, I mean, we never fished up to a feature. You never fished so that you were on the front edge of it. You were always on top of it or behind. But it was more to do with where the weed was. If it was weedy behind it, you had to fish where it was clear.
Yeah.
I did find on there actually as time went on that I could catch off of the weedy spots with those hybrid soft hook links, fishing them a bit longer, sort of 8 to 10 inches. As long as you got a drop, you felt lead at the bottom, you might drag some weed back with it, but actually going onto a spot near where they'd been showing, where they clearly hadn't been fished for, was really good. And I got a load of bites out of the swim, say Alcatraz, the going swim, but not off of the Alcatraz bar, off of one off to the right. That happened to be exactly the same number of turns of the reel as the main feature, and just cast around there because fish were showing near it, and you'd not caught anything off the main feature, which are obviously very spooky of because they've been hammered on it. And then boom, you get a drop somewhere. Right, it's on the edge of the factory there. Cast again, donk. Oh, got another drop. Donk, got another drop. Right, okay. Same spod range because it's the same fishing range. Put one out there, get one within an hour, and then get another one. You think, I'm winning here. Like, nobody knows about this thing because it's weedy. None of them will fish that because they have to fish on absolute gravel or, super, super clean. And that felt good when you're getting bites off of somewhere, Apache coming to swim or Rick Clements, and what are you fishing over there for?
So you clock your line straight away.
What's going on here? What's going on here, geese?
Yeah.
And then you get one, and then the cat's out of the bag. Then, isn't it? Everybody knows.
This is the thing. I mean, we're going to talk about spots in a minute, Dan. We're going to look at some spots, I think. But this is the thing that fascinates me about Elstow, is this, what I touched on earlier, this sort of almost like this democratic nature of the fishing, that most of the lads were simply fishing the same spots, and they all kept baited, and they all knew about them. So it was almost like there are no secrets if you all know what spots everyone's fishing.
Not amongst the in crowd, no, not amongst the weekend warriors. Each rotor, obviously, I don't think even the rotors shared information between them. I mean, I didn't live in that world, so but that's the impression I got. But certainly they were thick as thieves on the rotors. There were little cliques. I wouldn't say everybody spoke to everybody, but Apache's little gang all knew, and Pashley's little gang all knew.
But what this resulted in was that the spots were baited and fished religiously, almost to the exclusion of any kind of plumbing. Because
it wasn't searching, but the float went out. The float always went out at the start. There's very much like everybody fished to the float, and that's one thing that I didn't do. Once stick plateau 75 turns, it's 75 turns. I can cast that float as many times as I want. Yeah. It's still going to be 75 turns. And if you put the first rod out at 75 and it goes donk, I'm like, well, that's good enough. I don't need the float. And I wish actually I'd used the float a little bit more just for putting bait out and knowing, because I'd do a third of the depth of water short or something with the spod, and now knowing how long the bait takes to come out of a spod, especially with a stodgy mix like mine, because I'd make it so that you didn't lose any out the back of it. Like they all used to lose whatever it was, 10%, 20% out the back of their VO5 shampoo bottles, because you'd see it like, spod spill. You'd see that every time they cast out, where I either used to make a ground bait bung to go in the back to stop it from coming out, or make the mix just stodgy enough so that when it hit the surface, quite a lot of it came out and the rest of it came out not long after. But I'm sure that I would now, looking back at it, I was dropping bait over the top of my lines short of my rigs because it probably stayed in the spod longer than I thought it did.
I've seen Steve put his mix together on pit 1 actually, and from memory, his and this was going back.
Have we had Steve
quite
in?
A long time. No,
we should, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Do you think he'll come in?
I suggested to you he come in and do this together, but because I feel like he's not naturally one who seeks the limelight, Steve, is he? I'm not sure how
he doesn't seek the limelight at all, but he's an absolute legend, isn't he? So
let's do it.
Yeah.
We speak to Steve, don't we? So,
yes.
But his mix was designed to evacuate pretty quick.
Yeah.
A lot of hemp in there, and that does it for you, doesn't it?
Yes.
Heavy and
yes, and they wouldn't mix their pellet in until they were putting it out.
So,
there's no stodginess, no fluffiness to it whatsoever. Obviously, I wasn't using pellets, so crumb boilie stays crumb boilie, even if it soaks up juice. And I'll force it down into the spod. And I can remember, you'd spod, it'd land effectively if there was a float out there just behind the float. You'd flick it, and I could see from how quickly the nose cone bobbed whether it was full or empty. Because full, it bobs slowly because it's heavy. Yeah. Empty, it's bobbing really quickly. And it's emptied straight away. And like any kind of fishing of any discipline, if you do it a lot, you tend to get good at it, and you refine things and everything else. And I could get it so it didn't come out the back, but it did clear very, very quickly.
Another thing that struck out to me and reminded me of it when you mentioned the marker float situations, again, watching Steve fish these spots to the float like they all do, is this idea that to me it looked like a situation with some jeopardy. You put your 3 out tight and you've got to get your float in, right? But all they do is put the tip down, wind it off the spot, and it just drops into the abyss between the lines. Absolutely, almost never going to go wrong, is it?
Yeah.
But to me, I've
never watched them do it. I used to flick it up.
Makes total sense, though, Dan, doesn't it?
But I'd never cast 3 rods next to the float. I'd cast around with just a lead and line it up with trees on the far bank of where I'm getting the drops. And then often I wouldn't even put the float out. I knew what that was, how many turns of the reel that was, and I'd just do the reels the same turns, go at the same 3 trees. If it was 9 foot, I'd drop 3 foot off or something for the swing back, and just start baiting up.
Let's look at some spot stoves. We're very lucky to have an image from my old mate Tom
We're
Gibson.
very unlucky that the lake has been drained down and is no more. And that has given us the opportunity to look at these areas.
Yes, but given us I was going to go and get the shots, and now apparently the bars have been scraped away. But this is
such a shame.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Such a shame. Mate, we could have caught so many more than we did. I don't know how many of these. Dan,
what are your first impressions? Having not seen
I'm astonished that there are the lines of features that there are. I thought they were individual, like I say, like you can see that second line of round features,
like your
up from the bottom of the shot. I thought everything was like that, and there were just a few dotted around. Just massive eye opener. Could have caught so many more fish. Now, if I'd got a ticket for there now. I would have paid Rich Holden to go and do an underwater map and given it to the syndicate just so I could get to see what it was like, because it's truly astonishing, those lines of features. I think probably Averley in Essex is probably one of the only other lakes I know that's got lines of bars like that.
I think Tobes will have to put this on Instagram or something so that people who are listening can see this, because it's well worth having a look at. It is astonishing and one of the most unique, like you just mentioned, venues in the UK. Now, it occurs to me that you can't quite see the swims very well. You'll know where they are, Dan, but how those swims were oriented compared to the way the bars run would have had a massive impact on what you felt was out there.
Yeah, well, you were casting down them most of the time, rather than across them. I really didn't. I didn't think about it that deeply. It's just I saw somebody else get a bite off of somewhere. I looked at roughly where the float was, tried to find that same clear area, and the rest of it didn't really matter what was in between it. You were just getting bites off of that area or those two areas in that swim. But it's mad. There's in the sort of, I would say just past the middle, there's a very, very pronounced, which I think is the gnarly bar. I think in the middle, up a bit higher. That there is, I think,
huge.
I think that's the gnarly bar.
Yeah.
Again, a swim that I've caught very few fish out of. At the end of it, keep going up a little bit further. See that lovely? No.
Back to
You
that
tell you're
sort
not a
of
carp
bigger
angler,
bit.
Tobe, can't you? Look at that big brown round area that's sort of in the middle of the lake.
Go
That's
along
at the
it,
end of that
Tobes.
big bar.
Keep going.
No, the other way.
Other way.
Down
yeah.
that bar.
No, on that,
Tobes,
back onto that bar.
Along the bar.
That's it.
Keep
Little-
going.
there.
Right?
We get there. in the
Okay,
end.
now I think that's a feature out in front. I don't know if that's in front of the peanut swim or the stick swim. It might actually be the stick swim. Do you reckon it is?
I don't know it well enough, Dan. Never.
Well, you've been in there. You
I've been there,
photographed.
but
You
I've never-
photographed me in that swim.
I did. Yeah. That's
I think that might be the stick
Mhm.
there, and that bit there where that cross is stick plateau.
Certainly looks the part, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think if you go slightly above it and slightly left, there, I think
Down.
that there, that brown bit there, that little tiny brown, I think that might be what they call first bar. I think.
So that's your left-hand rod in that swim.
That's your
that you're
left-hand
talking
rod in
about.
that swim. This was the. I would say I caught more fish out of this swim than any other. Absolutely loved it, and they just used to use that area beyond it, that deep bit just above
Yes.
it. They used to use that area a lot.
So would you naturally you'd fish two on the plateau? Would you
Two
one
on the
there?
plateau. I have fished three on the plateau. I've never fished three on short bar, but that's if you look from the swim. If you go diagonally across, Tobe,
Which way? Dan?
left, diagonally across, you can see some steps. No,
Keep going.
no. Sorry.
Back down to the swim.
Back down to the swim. Yeah. So
There.
That's the swim there. Like drawing a line from there across the top of that bar to the very, very far corner. There was a bush in that far corner, and that was the tree of two halves.
Yes.
That you used to sort of aim at. So I'm pretty sure that is the stick. That one. The
And in
next
your-
one down is the peanut.
Yeah.
Then the point.
The famous Alcatraz.
Alcatraz on the opposite bank.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah, so left of where that cursor is now is the peanut, which again I only caught one or two fish out of. That little strip of green
Yes,
there in
yeah.
between the reeds, Tobe. Can you see?
Just
Go
to the
left of it there.
Yeah.
That's the peanut, I believe. And then the next gap down.
You're looking at reeds, aren't you, round from there, I guess?
Is that the point? And then the reeds is the next. No, the reeds is two round from that.
Is
So
it?
you had the point, and then I can't remember what that swim's called. That in between it.
What in your mind, Dan? How were these fish navigating the lake? Like, were they staying in areas? Were they moving during the 24-hour cycle?
I wouldn't say it's not like Walthamstow where they had like a almost a timetable, a route where they just end up in certain bits of the lake at certain times of the day. No, I think they just liked being in certain areas in certain weather conditions, and they would just hang out over the deep water. You know, the top of them features is maybe 8 to 10 foot deep, I'm guessing, and then the deep bits behind them are probably 18 to 20 foot deep, and they're sitting out over them and then going on to the features. As when there's food there and they want to feed.
I imagine lots of people listening to this would be wanting to know why the deeps never got fished and whether they would have produced fish, Dan.
They must have got fished. I did fish in the deep water in front of Alcatraz really close in and caught them out of there because they were showing really close in. But it's weird. It was a weird lake. Even in 20 foot of water, you'd have loads of silkweed. you know. So you weren't really presentable. But if you found a bit that was smooth clay, you know, yes, you could catch them out of 18, 20 foot. And I'm sure people have done that and been really successful doing it that I don't know about. And certainly, if I had my time again, I would have fished the deep water more. You know.
Is this the ants? Is that down this end, this corner?
Yeah, it's disappearing off the bottom left of the screen. The ants is at the very bottom of the lake.
And this is a deeper corner, isn't it?
Yes. So yeah, that deep water has got one.
Is it bread and cheese as well down that way?
Bread and cheese is there. Never caught fish out of that, I don't think.
Right under the car park, aren't they? Those swims, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you want me to throw the other ones?
I tended to fish the middle area of the lake more, just because that's where fish were showing regularly, and I knew the spots.
Yeah, let's have a look at this one. We're trying. Oh, go on then, Tobes. Throw that up.
But one before, please, Tobes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
different angle entirely, Dan. I wonder if there were a few fish around in between that bar at the time. There were a few left in the lake, I think, at that stage. So.
There was, yeah. Yeah, no, that's just the clay, isn't it? I think it's just they're just spots, mate. I think they're just. But I don't think.
Do you think that gully is shallower down than the others, perhaps?
Looks it, doesn't it? Definitely.
So we're now looking at the area you were describing.
We're looking at the car park. So that where that sort of pontoon's coming out, that's called the White Stick. That one, and you only fish down to the left at like. Left as you were in the swim, so the right as we look at it. Yeah, you'd literally.
That's on the edge of this big feature. That's
you'd fish literally really close in, all three rods really close in. Just sort of down there. I don't know what it was. How many turns? Maybe 30 turns or something like that. 30 yards. You'd have all three rods tramlined together at that range, and they'd come out of the deep water onto that feature, onto that sort of marginal slope, if you like.
What about what look like islands down to the right?
Yeah, so the islands there were fished by a swim called Side of Islands. Again, another swim that I don't know if I ever caught anything out of it. I didn't fish it very much at all. It was a night. That was one thing. That was a night area of the lake. You got a lot more night bites there. Where the stick swim that I used to fish, and corner knuckle and Alcatraz were. At the time I fished it, more day swims. So a lot of the people that turned up to do overnighters that were regulars and had fished the lake a long time went inside of islands because it had good form for getting a bite in the dark, you know. But again, like that, those islands being as pronounced as they are, I mean, you wouldn't want to fish on the front face of them with the slopes being as steep as that.
No, you know? Again. We can see very well in the foreground of this shot as well, down the plateau in stick that you were talking about, and actually really good view. But I want to go up to the screen and have a look. It looks like a crust on there, doesn't it?
So move down, straight down, to the right, down a bit more, down there, left of that, there.
So that's
that's stick plateau.
Yes,
that is stick plateau.
And where would you say your baits were presented, Dan, most of the time on that spot?
A little tiny bit back from. They weren't down the back of it.
They weren't.
On the top of it and down the side of it.
Yeah, nice. Too far, isn't it?
Too far.
Yeah, a little bit. Just losing resolution, aren't we? You can almost see like a tide mark of weed down where it's.
I mean, apparently it was so shallow when they first started fishing the lake that they used to walk out on some of these bars. Really? Yeah. But that's definitely the stick swim. That stick plateau, and if you go immediately right of it on the same plane, that's first bar. Yeah. So there were two separate bars. It looked, when I looked at the pictures earlier on, it looked like they were the same bar, but they're not.
It's sort of.
But they're flat bits amongst a load of more, more sort of rounded tops to the bars. So you're catching off of the flat areas, aren't you?
Right. I think when I first heard about the fishing on Elstow, I'd imagined people fishing on top of what were made out to be like church steeples, almost you miss it and you've gone.
That's what it felt like because like you could get three rods on that stick plateau pretty easily, but if you got anything off of that flat bit, you were dropping down into, the difference between that flat bit and where the water's edged down to the side of it is probably 8 foot, So it felt like you were just dropping into the abyss if you missed.
Presume round boilies out of the equation.
I was using chops most of the time
because of that.
No, not really, because we didn't know how steep they were.
I don't even know if a round boilie would fall off that, Dan. I can't get a real sense of that. But
round boilie would probably just roll down until it's hit a stone or a bit of weed or whatever and stay there. So you could end up with a lot of bait round the edge of the spot. But just I felt they ate crumbed bait more readily. The crumb bait soaked up all the liquids you put in better, because you're breaking the surface of it. So it sort of played into our hands. But I would say you're fishing on the top of it, maybe ever so slightly down the back edge of it,
So I didn't ask you about lead shape either. Did this have any bearing on, did the nature of the
fish with flat pairs a lot of the time, if I could. But obviously a flat pair doesn't cast as well, doesn't cast as straight,
right.
So trying to get 3 flat pairs on a spot like that in a crosswind with fluorocarbon, or trying to get the middle rod back out again when the other 2 are 4 foot apart and you're trying to put one in between them with a flat lead in a crosswind and you've just had a bite and the fish are about, it hones your skills, man. It really... from an accuracy point of view, it really, really does hone your skills at those sort of ranges,
And were you leaving rods propped up or not?
What do you mean?
Did they have to go back out, even if it was the middle rod, for instance?
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
right.
mate. Yeah, day or night, it was going back out again, And at night, you'd put it out, hit the clip, feel it down, right? Okay, the drop's right. Put it on the rest, tighten it up, leave it in the clip on the reel. Look at it in the dark. Oh no, it's a foot. It's a foot to the right. It's too close to the right hand rod. Try and flick it up and not pick the right hand rod up. Redo it again. So putting out a rod in the dark, if you 4 or 5 casts, it might take you half an hour. By the time you've allowed the line to settle and look where it is, sometimes you get it there first time. Other times you wouldn't. But no, I wasn't, because they were bait fish and they responded to hard work and activity. The harder you worked, the more you caught.
Okay.
So it wasn't like, if you were fishing on pit 2 and you got a bite, you would not recast that rod, because you wouldn't want to scare the other 8 that are left away. You'd hope one of your other rods would go. Probably most of the time it wouldn't. But that's the difference, I think, between fishing for a lot of big fish and a small number of a low stock lake, a small number of big fish.
Yeah, it's important to mention as well, I think, at this point, that you're trying to build a hit of big carp
always,
when possible,
always.
On one of the very few venues in the UK at the time that had that kind of fishing available.
Yes.
We hadn't seen the rise of your Wellies, your Monk's Pits. This was in a way like a prototypical superwater.
It was a superwater, and it was just past its peak when I fished it. So there was still, I think there were 12 40s in there. Amazing, I think there was over 20 40s in there at one point. I believe. I might be wrong, and forgive me, chaps, if I am. But yeah, it was its absolute height. It was ridiculous.
Now, with your fishery management head on, Dan, how much of that, the ultimate size of those fish, do you accredit to the diet that they had, for instance, or versus
almost nothing, because they all they gave them was salad.
Right.
They gave them hemp and corn their whole life, and they still got big.
I kind of imagine the pellet would have.
Oh yeah, sorry. The pellet was probably the only thing that actually gave them some nutritional value. And yes, they did that Scretins pellet, if it was Scretins. Would have been the biggest contributory factor. I know in later years, more and more boilie anglers fished it, and the fish, even old fish,
they rallied, hadn't
put weight on for a while, put weight on. Yeah. But it was dominated by hemp and corn.
Yeah.
When I fished it, and
so not the diet then. Really.
Not the diet.
Full of zebras.
Strain,
zebras in there. Zebra mussels in that lake as well. I feel like there probably were.
I'm trying to think if you didn't get cut off in the weed very much,
so maybe not.
Can't really remember whether there was. It
was
certainly
a
craze.
It was a craze.
No craze. No craze when I was there. Thank God. That came later. But yeah, just an amazing strain of fish.
Let's look at some fish, Dan, because
Yes.
it's one thing we haven't done.
Yes.
Obviously, thanks to Tom for the pictures, and
Yes.
we'll make those available.
Yeah, thank you. Who
Tom
sent us-
Tom Gibson.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson.
So, let's have early.
So, 0607,
Yeah,
the
go on,
very
so
bottom of that lot, mate.
What we're gonna? So that's the King of Elstow just gone past.
Right, okay, so up one,
That grey one.
that's up two.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So is this
That's the first 30 that I caught out of there. I believe it was about £32. The pictures of these fish never, ever, ever do them justice. Never. The detailing on the fish, the little tiny little scales, like the colour of them. It's blue, look. Do you know what I mean? It's like purpley blue, the top of it. Like that was out of the reeds, cast off to not onto the, what they call the best spot in the world.
Yeah.
Not cast over to that, cast off to the left. The back door, I think they might have called it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was your line of reeds on the far bank, and then there was a line of reeds slightly short of them, which you couldn't fish into. And there was a back door and a front door.
Right,
I remember.
amazing, yeah,
I remember
I don't
to the because you could stand on the high bank and look down into the reeds and see them going into this bit behind these reeds. And obviously, you got your way in and your way out, and it was the back door and the front door. I believe. We need Bailey here really to correct me.
I've seen some photos that Steve took on the best spot in the world when it was drained of the leads.
Right.
And like a haul of leads, some of which were ancient and some of which were new. And
really?
It's amazing. I'll dig it out once to finish.
Mega.
Maybe if Steve lets us, we'll throw it up there. But just you're talking 30 years worth of angling, aren't you? Probably.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them have disappeared, by the way, into the silt probably, or what have you.
Yeah.
But what a great fish.
Yeah, just that I was, as you can see, so chuffed. That was my first 30 out of there. So chuffed. Yeah, that was.
They'd rock as well, Dan, wouldn't they, in that deep water?
Mate,
wedge you up and
fights
stuff.
were just ridiculous. Every fight was just beyond a battle.
Right.
Every single fight. I can't ever remember a fish just wallowing in. Never. Come off them bars into the deep water, flop through the weed, and you'd pull them back to it, and it'd all look up solid, and then they'd start to move, and you'd be walking back, and then, you'd get them away from the feature, and they'd be boring down in the deep water, and then in the edge again,
See them quite early, wouldn't you? I guess if it was day.
Yeah, but you had that weed going down the marginal slope under your feet that you would never ever fish, and then they try and do you in that as well, and you're trying to. I remember with the fluorocarbon, you'd go not on that particular spot, but you'd go out to the features, and letting off the fluorocarbon, it'd just drop because you've got it like just hanging between the rod tip and the feature.
Yes.
The feature's 8 to 10 foot. It's 20 foot in between, and you just keep paying off fluorocarbon, paying it off. I mean, nobody else was fishing like that. From my knowledge, they were all fishing bowstring tight lines. This is the other thing. I was probably the only guy not fishing with Elstow bobbins on the lake. I was using Muddy Waters bobbins, and I just refused to use them just because I'd be.
How ironic!
I'd be
then.
falling in. How ironic indeed that it's the bobbin we ended up selling, and I never use anything else now. It's stubborn for the sake of being stubborn,
Go back down, Tobes, because I think that.
Yeah, that's it. Keep going.
So hang on a minute. So that's all one capture of scaly two-tone there, isn't it?
Keep going further down, Tobes.
Oh, the other side,
that fish. That's another one, I think, from that same.
Looks the same trip, doesn't it?
That same trip, yeah. Like 26-pounder, I think. But mate, every one was a prize. Every one. I remember Steve saying to me after the event, he walked into my swim as I was landing a stocky, like a 16-pounder, maybe something like that, out of the reeds. And it might have even been my first ever fish out of there, And I'm waxing lyrical about the look of this 16-pounder and how it's going to grow up to be an amazing fish and all that sort of thing. And he said, in that moment, I knew you was all right. I knew all the rubbish that had been said in advance of you getting a ticket was complete and utter twaddle, because you had loved this little carp so much, and everybody else would have been moaning that they'd got it over to the spot and then caught a 16-pounder. And you genuinely loved it, and I did, and I didn't catch many of the stockies because they hadn't got big enough by the time I left. But they were before it got drained. They were the target fish of the recent era.
And actually, big ups to Steve, because it's been a long project for him.
He made them all, didn't he?
And those fish, I've said it to as many people who will listen, but in a day and age when we try and preserve some strains, and quite often they don't look anything like the originals. Those Elstow fish look like Elstow fish.
Absolutely.
You can't even tell.
And still do.
Yeah.
Still do.
You can't even tell that. I think they were 06, 07 stockies maybe.
Might have been.
And you can't tell. I can't tell.
Yeah.
Which are the mums and dads and which are the offspring?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many old ones left, are there, of the ilk that you were catching?
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, Toby, let's fire up some more, mate, because we want to see these. These, I mean, that's the king of Elstow, right? I mean, I don't know if we've jumped to the end of the game here a little bit.
I'm sorry, but even I wanted to put that one.
Yeah, let's put him up, because we can come back to him. But look, I mean, Dan, look at that. Look at his little fin, mate.
Utterly ridiculous.
That fish must have been in his pump there as well.
Yes,
because I think he declared.
I can't remember. I mean, yeah, you can. It's solid, isn't it? Solid as a rock. Female, probably little tiny pecs. So
small head,
probably
big shoulder,
probably a female.
Really pronounced dip in the back.
Yeah, mate. But them scales, man. That was in the stick swim, short bar, 52 turns.
These Bedfordshire mirrors, it's almost the reverse. So many were scale less that when you did get a slightly scaly one, that was really one to write home about.
Yeah, well, he's called the King of Elstow, isn't it? And for very good reason.
Do you remember the trip that you caught?
Mate, the weather was just blowing an absolute hoolie. Had it just before first light, and I don't mind admitting it stayed in the sling for a little bit of time, so I could do the pictures sort of in the daylight. You can see there's still flash on it.
Yeah,
but I wanted to be able to see the screen so I could get some reasonable shots of it. I caught quite a few that trip. I might have had 10 in that particular trip. Yeah, or 8 or something. I was on a good. I think I did. From memory, I did 25 nights that year. I had 40 bites, landed 36.
I mean, people might be surprised you did so few nights.
Because it's a one swim lake in the spring. If you're not in the reeds, the reeds or the pump. If you're not in those two swims because they're shallow,
so you'd leave it alone, would you? At that
leave
time?
It alone completely. I didn't fish it in the spring at all. And I'd go after spawning because everybody's left because they've got smaller. And fishing midweek in the height of summer, like I'd go on sort of July. Obviously, the fish are quite obliging. You almost got the place to yourself. And again, I'd fish it up until October. It was a notoriously difficult winter water.
Right.
Did very little. They used to catch them on floaters in the winter.
Yes.
You know, in the fog, because there was a tip right behind it, so the seagulls were like biblical, and floater fishing was really good on there. Not that I did much of it, but to catch them over 25 foot of water in January on mixers when it's so foggy you can't even see your controller, and it's just the rod's just getting pulled along the floor, and just crazy.
From memory, it was a bit of a Martin Clark thing, wasn't it? Martin's caught them in all kinds of weather over there. I mean, and actually, you must have known Martin. Whether he was still on the lake at that point is another matter, but an Elstow character certainly.
Yeah, so Martin had written for certainly our second rig book. I don't know if he'd written for the first one as well or not, but we were sponsoring him with kit when it was just sponsoring with kit, back then. He'd obviously caught loads out of there, was part of the bailiff team, certainly
Steve credits him with quite a lot of help. I mean, bear in mind the Apache's been there since a lot, since almost day one. Well, not quite, but I think Martin helped him along quite when Steve started. So it gives you an idea of how much influence he's had back then.
I think Martin was still fishing it, I think, when I very, very first went on. And he would have definitely tipped me off about bits, probably not given me the full picture, but given me something to go on. I can't really remember. But but he was. I think he went from there to where you fish. Summerleys, I think. I think Taplow had been slightly
like Martin
before
went
it.
away and came back to Elstow at some stage, didn't he? Definitely.
He
sort of
did.
floated
Yeah.
and then...
Yeah. I think he fished it in its absolute prime. He caught one, I think, was it called the Olympic or something?
The Universe, was it?
Or was it the Universe?
Just
just some
great fish.
mega shots in Cartworld of Martin
Yeah.
with Elstow fish, just mega. But obviously, like, attracted a lot of the wrong kind of attention from your Elstow mafias because he was putting the fish in Cartworld, and it wasn't like you weren't allowed to do it. I think, but because it was the Beds clay
like we
pit,
discussed,
but it was very much frowned upon publicising anything from there. That's the buzzing fish, £35, I think.
I think my favourite...
Chemical Lee caught that and said,
Lee
"I'm
Petty,
absolutely buzzing,"
right?
And that's why it became, I believe. Yeah,
love the little
Lee,
pearly
the Chemical
scales.
Lee was on there. On there while I was on there. A great guy, great to fish with.
Very positive guy.
Very positive guy. No ego. Open with information.
Part of a small Leicestershire contingent that was on
yes.
around the time.
Yeah, well, he would have been matey with Martin Pick, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he must have been, I suppose.
And just nice company. Nice company. There wasn't a massive amount of socialising going on because the swims were quite a long way apart. You were snag fishing. It was frowned upon, certainly for new members. I know that there was a fish in there called the unattended, because somebody was unattended, 3 swims away eating Chinese when he got the bite. So I think that the old guard used to get away with a lot more than we would ever dare to.
I have to say that the one fish that I love the name is the cheating boatfish. Or
never heard of that.
Or borrow a rod viney, like that one, or have a go cleghorn. I think that's the same fish. Borrow a rod viney and have a go cleghorn, I think, is the same fish.
Right,
2 names.
Yeah, don't know either of them. I remember there was the slag.
Yeah,
Better Off Dead. Johnny Arthurface. The clipfish.
Yeah,
as well. Had a little nodule somewhere on its body that you could have a little flick
you had
off.
the white slug, didn't you, as well? That was
the white slug. Yeah.
That's a cool one.
That's a mega. I think that's called the Flask.
Yeah,
or was called the Flask. I think that was like 37 at the stick swim again. Me looking a bit perplexed, looking in that was the old Canon,
bright old day. That
Canon. What's it? I haven't got
Power shot. I haven't
Canon G5.
Yeah.
I haven't got the clicker in my fingers, so maybe it wasn't. Maybe somebody else is taking the picture.
I reckon. Yeah, you don't look happy.
There's the old mohawk going on there. Do you know what? That might have been the day that Mark Holmes came down and did a thing with me.
Good old Holmesy.
He says I never did any publicity, but obviously I did. There were a few articles actually. I remember doing stuff with
UK Carp.
Yes,
you did, didn't you, with Steve Broad?
With Broady, yes, with Broady. Sorry, Broady, for your name escaping me.
I don't know why that just occurred to me. That,
No, I was writing for UK Carp at the time.
I think this was one of these was front cover, but you definitely had the mohawk on the front cover of UK Carp. I remember that.
But this was Advanced Carp, I think. Was it
Holmesy? Yeah,
Holmesy?
I think I'd just started on the mag at the time.
And, he literally walked on, and I'd had a 40-pounder, and then maybe I'd had that as well. Mega fish though. Look at that.
Yeah.
Just everything that a carp should be. That purpley greyness.
Can you make these, Dan? Can you make these for embryo? Is this possible?
Why
don't they look like that anymore?
Well, we've got some of them.
You've gone to source.
I've got some of them. I've got some of them in my fish tank at home.
Right.
Yeah. Almost identical to that. That will one day be somewhere and be enjoyed by somebody. Let's have a look at the other side of that, Tobe. Come on, let's revel. Keep going. The other.
Yes. Hang on a minute.
That's it. That's your front cover shot, isn't it?
It was the front cover of my first ever issue as editor.
Was it?
That's why I recognised it, and I thought it was UK Carp.
Right, so
it wasn't.
So it was Holmesy taking the picture then. That's why I was...
Well,
or was it you taking it?
No, I didn't take the picture, but we definitely used that picture as the... That was my first
ever
cover.
There's no clicker there. There's no clicker, so somebody's taking that picture.
Maybe Holmesy. But yeah, he looks old, that thing.
The eye is sort of really in focus, the flank of the fish, does he?
No, it's definitely got aperture face priority on, I think, Dan, hasn't it? You look pretty pin.
But the fish's face is sharp, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those old G-shot things, I mean, you look back now and the pictures aren't quite what they are.
No. I mean, it's come on leaps and bounds, isn't it?
But would this have been part of a big hit?
Yeah, 6, 8 fish, 10 fish.
Was there a stage when you were?
Well, let's fit. What would it have been? No, I think 10's strong in it. I think if you had more than 5 in a session, I think I'd consider that I was doing really well.
So are you setting yourself targets at this point?
No, I'd done the target thing at Mercer's, and I remember we was talking about it. It backfired on me royally, and didn't enjoy the experience at all. So no, I was just trying to catch as many as I could catch in the time that I was there. You know?
And I think we should reflect on the fact that you've widely said that it's your favourite fishing ever. This maybe it still is.
Mate. It is, mate. I would love there on Embryo Baston. We drained a lake down called the Shallow Pit, and we made a feature in every swim. Like there was with the diggers. Really? We made a feature in every swim, and we made them different shapes and what have you, a bit like Elstow, so that every swim has got something to fish to short of where the islands are, as a homage to Elstow. And there is a side of island swim on some of our lakes, the Alcatraz at Gigantica is named after Alcatraz at Elstow, so... Yeah, very, very, very fond memories of it. I mean, go back to that one. Go cut it down. Look at that. Look, doesn't matter how much they weigh, does it? When they look like that, that's purple. Look at it. I know that the colours are not great on the camera and the saturation's up too high, but still,
it really isn't that different, is it?
It really isn't that different. Like I say, there's no picture I've ever taken of a fish has done it justice.
The detail is...
You could just look at the blackness of that tail for half an hour before you put it back. Do you know what I mean?
The shape,
you just could.
The shape of the tail as well, Dan.
Just absolutely ridiculous, mate.
Let's get Scaly Two-Tone, because that became a bit of a... Like, really, that for me, that was the one, Scaly Two-Tone. You had it twice.
3 times.
3 times. I guess it was a fish that liked you, Dan, because I don't think it was particularly...
that's the other side of
King of Elstow.
King of Elstow there. Look at that. Look.
Do you know what I like about that is the atmosphere. It looks like it's windy down.
Mate, moody as really windy night. I'd already caught at least one that night, maybe a couple, and then to get that, and I didn't know it was the King of Elstow at the time. I showed other people the pictures, and they're like, "You've had the King of Elstow," but you can see it all bristling. Look, the tail still curled round it, angry.
He doesn't get caught a lot.
No, mate, no.
The head is absolutely mega.
Just
more,
ridiculous.
Maybe the other shot more than that one, and that little accretion of slime on top of the gill plate there and stuff. It's just
accretion.
Yeah,
never heard that word before.
Scaly Two-Tone though. Let's have a look at that. Another one of the, again, slightly more unusual resident. Incredible shape. So there,
that guy.
Yeah. I don't know which is your favourite picture, Dan, but maybe the returner.
One's in the water of that fish. So that was a November capture. I think it would have been around July time when I caught it, when you came over and did the pictures for the Telling Tales book. And I happened to have caught it on that session
We'll find that and show that picture.
Yeah. Let's go back, Tobe, and see if we've got shots in the water.
We have. We've got one returner. Would they have been Korda, some kind of combats that you've done there, Dan? Were they an early?
No, I think they're probably a gap or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one, yeah.
Is that one where I'm looking at the fish?
Oh.
That's the other side of it. No, it's not.
I remember. I'm sure there's a similar shot of Pooley as well. Was Ian on there at a similar time to you, or
no?
With that fish,
mega carp. Yeah.
I mean, you'd probably consider having those reeds photoshopped out away from the face these days, Dan, wouldn't you?
Well, I would have been a long way this way in front of the reeds, wouldn't I? And that shot on about F16 or something. I think
the background's in focus.
Yeah, everything. The whole world's in focus.
I mean the reeds in the background,
the far bank's almost in focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that was back then. We didn't know, mate. Well, certainly I didn't know. You can just sort of see beyond the cloud that I've created by kneeling in the water how clear the water is behind. But this is this is a great session. I was doing 2 nights. First night I went in, I think, the Point because Pashley's nan was fishing. Do you know? You heard about the famous
caught more big ones than I have, mate.
Pashley's nan?
Yeah.
So
Nana Pashley.
Nana Pashley. Yeah. So I met her once actually at a show with Thomas, who now works for us as a young lad. She was lovely, but I wouldn't dare. No, I wasn't. I couldn't have been fishing the Point. I was fishing Corner Knuckle, which is further down the lake from that. And Pashley's nan was in the Stick, and Carl was in the Point. Carl can catch him for fun out of any swim, and like a 90-yard flick is flick to him, and I think he caught a couple out the Point as well. But the Stick was on fire, absolutely on fire at this point, and I had 2 nights. I think did a night in Corner Knuckle, which is as close as you could get, nothing. Saw him packing up, waited for him to go. I don't know if I bumped into Carl sort of as he was going or something. But basically, bite time was the last hour of daylight, and it must have been like 2 o'clock before I got in the swim. And I managed to get out in like 20 minutes, get my spot out, get all 3 rods on the spot, and get out like in 20 minutes. And then the first bite came probably, I don't know, I think just before it got dark, which was a fish called Wolsey's Mate at £40 an ounces, and Wolsey's Mate and Scaly Two-Tone come out together a lot. If you catch one, you tend to catch the other, and I've caught Wolsey's Mate twice when I've caught Scaly Two-Tone. I don't know if I caught it all 3 times, but certainly twice I caught it. So I think I caught Wolsey's Mate first, and I remember I had a prototype hook which never came out, which I've still got a few of. I had it on another rod, and while I'm playing Wolsey's Mate, one of the other rods has gone, but it's gone in the same direction as Wolsey's Mate. So Wolsey's Mate has sort of gone across it, and you'd play Knit One, Pearl One with the rods, but there's a fish on the one I'm playing Knit One, Pearl One with as well, and I'm thinking this is a new hook. This is like size 8. This is never staying on. And I landed Wolsey's Mate at £40 an ounces, and landed the other one as well at 35 something. Amazing. In the same net, and I'd been in the swim an hour. Do you know what I mean? And I think I got night shots of them 2, and then this one came, I think, at first light, which is a really unusual time. I think if we go up, I think you can see a picture of the rods. If you go back from Scaly Two-Tone, there's a picture of the rods, and I believe I had it like at first light. I think it's the very top shot, mate. There you go. So
that could easily be November, couldn't it?
Pretty sure it was the beginning of November. There's your Muddy Waters bobbins, your tournament entos, obviously Infinity 12 foot 3 1/4 with the high standoff rings on that I had done all the way down the rod.
Do you keep rods like that, Dan?
Nah.
You're
I wish I had, but I'm not sentimental with that. I'll give them away, mate.
Yeah.
Give them to people in the sponsored angler team. Give them to friends, whatever. I don't think I've ever sold a set. No. Give them like to the foreign team. That means a lot to them. That they've got my set of rods.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing to be able to do, and Dyer never minded. Look how thick the butts of the rods are. That's Duplon, isn't it? Rather than shrink.
The spongier stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Still got the old Lockie backrests. Still using those today.
Those actual ones. I presume you've got the new ones.
I've got the little ones.
Yeah,
the little ones.
I've got a set of those.
I've still got a set of those as well. Yeah,
with the yellow.
Lasts forever, mate. Everything he makes lasts forever, doesn't it?
Good old Lockie.
Good old Lockie. So that would have been probably just before I got the bite, which is not a great time of year to get a bite like first light. Getting first light bites in November is unusual, but yeah.
When you caught it the time that I came over, I think it was 43-ish.
Probably the biggest weight I had it. Yeah.
And I drove over. I lived about 9 miles away at the time. Probably not even that. Just over the other side of the M1. And
That always gets me when people say, "Do you get this, Toby?" When people go, "Yeah, it was about 7 miles, or it was about 7 minutes." Well, no, it must have been 7. You say about 10 miles, don't you? Don't say about 9 miles, do you? Does that not bother you, Toby? It really bothers me when people.
You know what though? It's completely accurate because I'm presumably I did. It was 9 miles to Elstow village, so it was about 9 miles. To
but it was about 10 miles. That's what you round it up if it's
My
about.
sense of
don't you?
direction's horrific, so I wouldn't be.
Right? No, it's not. It's just it was about 23. You know,
I know what you mean.
You know, it was about 23.12 or whatever. It's like no, it was about 25
anyway.
pounds.
It was about 10 miles to. It was about 10 miles to Elstow, and I drove over and parked in the middle car park. When did my way down? It's what's now called because you've got the top one on pit 2 now.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So yes. Yeah.
You've got the one on the road, then the middle car park. So I parked in the middle car park, walked down between the sort of hawthorns, dog rows, and all that. And as I came onto the bit where it flattens out between the 2 pits, there was a man playing a fish on pit 2 in I think the grassy.
Right. Okay.
And I sort of stood there for a minute and watched. Rod hooped over and thought, anyway, you've got this in the bag, so I'm going to go over there. Photograph what is, I think, the best fish in pit 1.
Yep.
And then later found out that he was playing the mother. So
really,
yeah. So funny how fate can fork one way or another. I'd like to have seen the mother, but
I would have liked to have seen the mother as well.
I'm pleased that I saw the scaly two-tone and it was a phenomenal fish. I don't have any memories of that moment looking through. Very much you're concentrating on what's through the lens, aren't you?
That is the thing with taking pictures, and I found this on safari. You're not present to what's happening because you're concentrating so much on what's going on through the lens, and even when you catch them, I have to look back at the pictures to remember the whole thing. There isn't a vivid memory there unless you stand back and look at it and sort of take it in and actually take a moment to look at it. All the concentration is on making sure you get good shots, making sure the fish stay safe, getting it back in the water as quickly as possible, not upsetting anybody. That's what the focus is on.
So with that in mind, in your own fishing now, Danny, are you taking that time to have that sort of mindfulness around a capture knot or not?
Yeah, maybe a little bit more.
When they're in the net, isn't it?
It's when they're in the net, yes. When they're in the net, I've had some nice ones recently, and looking down at them in the net, and I have on the mat looked at them laying in the middle of the mat and what have you, but still not enough. Still not enough. You get caught up in the moment, don't you? You get caught up in the moment of wanting to get good shots, and
Now, I know you're someone who's angling very rarely stays still.
Never.
Never. And especially as the kind of the sort of leading edge of this company, you've got to be out tested stuff and the like. So I'm presuming that one season to the next, your tech has probably changed on Elstow. So perhaps using some of the fish that you then went on to catch, can we take a bit of a romp through how things changed for you on that lake?
Yeah, well, I don't know, Toby, if you can find Scaly Two-Tone from the Telling Tales book. Okay. I don't know if there's images out there.
We can find them. We'll put it in afterwards, maybe.
Yeah. But that was the cog era. So the centre of gravity lead with the swivel in the middle. Still with me 3 bits of tubing. I still had me 3 bits of tubing that had the weed on them. And that was a game changer. I'd used that over the winter previous on Walthamstow, and you're just getting more bites. You're just getting faster bites, more bites. You just knew it was converting more opportunities, and used it on there, and it worked brilliantly. Most of the bites coming in the day, so when you're recasting, you could see, because it does tangle more than a normal rig. There's no doubt about it. But fishing with a PVA stick, which I did for a lot of it, actually backtracking to that, when I caught the 3 in a 240s, that Scaly Two-Tone was 40, Wolsey's mate was 40, and the 35. Let's see if we can have a look at that 35 pounder, because that's a classic Elstow. That's leather.
That's a right result. A brace of 40s and a 30, but in anyone's
35
book.
In November, in a night, and that's the 35.
Oh, it's mega, isn't it?
Just ridiculous, mate.
Love that fish, mate.
Ridiculous. and I think the colours are a bit funny on that screen generally. I don't remember it being as red as that in the actual pictures.
Is he one of the tenchy ones? There's quite like a tenchy sort of crew.
Yeah.
Tench tail.
They're just mega, mate. Just mega.
Leathery crew.
But that was on sticky baits, bloodworm wafters, 4-inch hook links, and they're effectively bottom baits. They're all fishing pop-ups.
Hybrid stiff at this
Hybrid
stage?
stiff. Yeah. Heavy swivel lead. Probably a PVA stick as well, so the stick's almost laying against the lead. The hook link's so short. Nailed 3 real good uns in one night. So the diametric opposite of how the other guys all fished it. Still over bits, but I've got bits on the end, and I'm more convinced than I've ever been that you do not need a long hook link to catch a fish over bits.
This has been
over light stuff.
This has been a big feature of your, angling and, your public sort of fishing as well, hasn't it? Since probably, I don't know, you tell me, a long way back, the short stiff hook link,
Yes.
It gave me cause to reflect on it when you did the underwater stuff with the big cream around that actually the rig you ended up using for that was actually, I mean, again, you're probably going to tell me it's completely wrong, but my memory is that it was very similar to the rig that you ended up fishing at Welly with the long shank short.
Very, spinner style rather than a combi rig, but a bigger hook.
In principle, you've stuck quite close to that for 15 years and more.
Oh, and more, yeah, and the principles don't change, do they? If the hook link tightens as the fish sucks the bait in, so it's already gone tight. The fish hasn't moved; it's already gone tight. The hook point is facing towards the flesh because of the way the hook turns over, whether it's done with a bit of shrink tube and a combi rig or whether it's an in-turned eye and a spinner rig or whatever, if that hook flips in your hand, it flips in their mouth and that nails them, and it's nice when you're catching them on something completely different. Like none of them, they're all still fishing pop-ups on them hard spots. They all were. Nobody was fishing a wafter or a bottom bait with a short hook link on there, and to catch 3 nice ones. I'm sure Passy's nan caught a few prior to me being in the swim, and I'm sure Passy caught, Carl caught them as well off of the point. But I was well chuffed with that as a result. But that must have been the year before I started with a cog, I think, because that would have been lead clip fishing.
Yeah, I think there's probably quite a gap, Dan, because I feel like that scaly two-tone, my photographs were 2010 at the earliest.
Were they?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So there's a big.
So you're right. Okay. So yeah, a few years after then.
Yeah.
A few years after.
In terms of the way the mechanically what the other lads were trying to achieve, we stopped for a minute and we were chatting about the ways that lads fished on that lake, and I've seen people with the likes of Ipswich Lee with these incredibly long hook links. Mechanically, Dan, how's that working in your mind?
I don't know.
If you can imagine how a short hook link would work, you can presumably imagine how a long one would.
Well, I think if the hook link is out straight and it gets tightened against the lead, whether it's 3 inches long or 23 inches long, if it's already straight and it does tighten, then the same thing happens and the hook finds its purchase and you've got him. I don't know why they fished hook links as long as that, and but they caught loads of fish. Ipswich Lee was and is a fantastic angler, massively consistent. Did you photograph him casting out ever?
I must have done that day.
Because I was told he feels the lead down with his eyes shut.
I didn't. Had I known, I might have looked for that.
Right. That's what I was told with Ipswich Lee. Feels the lead down with his eyes shut.
Lovely
you
guy.
Can feel more.
Yeah, enjoyed.
Now maybe that's another Elstow myth. Maybe that is true. I don't know. Some people that fish with him, and Lee himself. Please do let us know. Does he feel the lead down with his eyes shut, or is that a load of rubbish? I don't know.
Do you think that the short rigs are constrained by what way the fish approach the rig, and the long ones might not be? The effectiveness of the rig, sorry.
No, because I've seen from the underwater filming that if the fish comes in over the top of the hook link, doesn't matter how long it is, there's not enough flexibility in the very end bit for it to get in its mouth. They suck it and it's under its chin and it won't bend round and go in.
Or even their long supple jobs.
The long braided ones might do, yeah. But I think I think they felt that the fish were coming in and wafting the bait up off the spot.
Yeah, I think I've heard this.
They were taking the stuff that was off the bottom. So if you had a very, very light hook bait, that stayed off the bottom for a long time and got taken in midair. You know, so I think that was the thinking behind it. But all of the approaches worked. Mine did, theirs did. Lee's was long mono hook links. You know, I remember seeing. I think it was Glenn Mulkerson, like, you know, 14-inch braided hook links, tiny little hooks, you know, a grain of plastic and a bit of foam or whatever it was. You know, that works. He caught loads. You know, I think, you know, the fish, loads of different tactics catch carp, don't they? You know,
I feel like Pickies was more back towards you, maybe a little bit between the two.
Maybe a bit between the two.
Wide gape, low back.
Yes.
Not
braided hook link.
Yeah.
Coated
braid.
Coated braid. Sorry.
Picky. You know, he was pretty solid in his sort of commitment to that style of rig and wouldn't change it a lot.
Very, very good angler. Very good caster. Very aware. You know.
Let's have a little look at some fish then, because while we ruminate on what perhaps was in between. The cog and then what came before that.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the way the rig was constructed, you've already moved to hybrid stiff. When was that and why was that?
Honestly, can't
Forget
remember.
the when. To be fair,
I can't remember. But
let's go 08 Tobes just so that we can see some different ones. I mean, can we go back to that leather? Hang on a sec. What's he got on there? Let's pop that one of the fish of the hooked fish. Let's have a look what the evidence of this photo is showing us. So that looks like hybrid soft still at that stage.
Yeah, that's hybrid soft. Yeah, that's hybrid soft
with the blowback. The two
blowback with the ring, 2 grains of enterprise plastic.
Yeah.
The shot or the counterbalance is gone off of it by the look of it.
And what it does show you the small mouths, Dan, some of these fish.
Yeah.
Rock hard looking small mouth.
Yeah. Size, that'll be a size 8 wide gape, 1,000,000%. Bit of clay shrink tube.
When was the last time you put a size 8 out?
Don't know. Years.
It's mad though, isn't it? Because you obviously had supreme confidence in that there.
Yeah.
For some of the hardest fighting carp you can imagine as well.
Yeah. I think with small baits, isn't it? You were governed by the buoyancy of the 2 grains of plastic, really. That's a nice one if you can flip that. Can you flip that?
Oh, look, he can do anything. He's got the techers. What's that one, Dan? Do we know? We don't remember probably, but
30. That was a 39-pounder, I think. I think Brody took that picture. Is that the Italian? Might be a fish called the Italian.
Let us know.
I don't know. Let us know, Elstow stalwarts.
But yeah, that's a mould. The body shape of that is a very distinct set of fish in that lake.
Yeah, man.
Not all of them. In fact, probably not most of them, but certainly a group of big uns.
They're still alive, mate. The next generation of them is there. We'll be catching them in embryo lakes at some point in the future. That size,
and hopefully in Elstow, as long as they, if it continues.
Yeah, in Pit 2, absolutely, mate. Yeah,
I want to see that leather Tobes, the one back up. But I just love those ones. So the yellowy one, keep going up. That one.
That could even be that same one, couldn't it?
I don't know, but he's awesome.
Just they're mega, mate, aren't they?
Little fins again.
And that is, even though you've got those scales along the sort of ridge of the back and the dorsal, that is still a leather.
Genetic leather.
Absolutely, yeah. They don't have to be completely scaleless to be a leather.
Would these all have been that same swim, Dan?
This is Alcatraz.
Oh, this is
Alcatraz.
Opposite side of the lake then.
Opposite side of the lake. Another swim that I loved was really, really kind to me, that swim. And it's a nice social. So Rick Clements used to come down and drink me dry tea, bless him. Just the best company on the bank. Just a funny fucker.
He's still fishing there.
Oh mate, yeah. He's still doing it. Still fishing Pit 2. He's got a Bastard Big Lake ticket. Fished at Baston. Fished at embryo broom as well.
He had, I think, at one stage. I feel like when I think about Elstow in its prime, I think of probably him and the likes of Phil Cousins, maybe.
Yeah.
But like Rick, the number of big uns he caught, I think he did have like 14 40s or something out of there in a season, or in his time, mate. On there, I forget. But
crazy.
Yeah.
Just absolutely loved it. Like I say, really funny. Dry as a bone, absolutely dry as a bone. Just so funny. Just a really nice way about him.
And was the fishing the same in Alcatraz? Were you applying the same principles?
Yeah, exactly the same, mate. It's fluorocarbon. This is like the year after. It's all sort of just honed. Leg clips.
And when you think about tactical changes, because I'm keen not to keep going back to photos for the people who are listening, but when you think about tactical changes you made, what are the bits that stand out in the evolution of the way you fished on that lake? Obviously, the cog being one, but what about the rig end of things and the hook?
That didn't really change
stayed
that much,
with the
to be honest.
Stayed with
I stayed with the wide gates. Like I say, there was this other pattern of hook, a straight pointed hook, which never came out, which actually we might even revisit. Caught quite a few on those straight pointed hooks. But yeah, that side of it didn't.
You had the flirtation onto the combis at one stage.
The combis definitely. When I got into them, that was the latter. I think I used combis pretty much exclusively in the latter couple of years I was on there, because I like I say, I'd learned to tie it so you could get the braided bit as short as possible, because I was joining the two materials first and then passing the braided bit through the eye of the hook and then tying the whipping knot, so you could make the braid a millimetre long if you wanted to, because there was no slippage in the tightening of that.
Have you ever been asked
knot.
to tie one of those whipping knots down for people, by the way?
Once or twice, yeah.
I think you've done it for me with the chod. The chod that it's just it's the best result, isn't it?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah,
but
yeah.
Still really difficult to get right if you don't do it a lot.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I think it was the welly era when you were using a lot of hinge flinging going on, Dan. It
was choddies first and then hinges after. Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we get a chance to talk about welly at some stage. But Tobes, let's have a look at a few more fish. Let's take a quick scan through.
Look, we've got a rig there. So part of a boilie.
Is that a captor?
That's captors, yeah.
Yeah. So that was an early captor, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So that's. I mean, you're seeing how good the camouflage is of that hook by comparison to the clear spot. That's obviously something just in the edge there, but and that'll be the brown hybrid stiff. That
by
looks
that
like,
stage
actually.
It'd have to have been.
It looks
the captors were much later, weren't they?
It looks like hybrid stiff, just seeing the tightness of the weave of that braid.
Very short kicker going on there, Dan, which was obviously the way you
shrink
fished.
Tube.
Yeah,
bit of shrink tube, just angled in, and a bit of a boilie, that's just come straight out of the crusher, and then
really?
a bit of plastic on top.
The homemade jobbies had gone at this stage.
Well, I wasn't using them there and then for whatever reason. Don't know why.
Okay.
Got any more of those, Tobes? Oh, so this is that. Go up a bit. There, that one.
Slicking, love it.
Back down.
To either of them really, but
that one. So that's your Elstow.
Classic
spot.
Elstow scene, Dan. Really, that isn't it?
So obviously there was some oil in the bait because it is slicking up. There's my bucket that I've still got in the back of the van right now.
Which one? The left-hander.
The left-hand one. Yeah. Yep. And the spots were those spindly trees in the background behind the slicking. Those spindly trees. The right-hand spindly tree, middle spindly tree, and the right-hand one of the...
Another name that I like, is that near the black light spot, the so-called black light? Do you know that one?
No, I don't know that one.
Maybe it's a later one, Dan.
No.
Yeah.
Black light spot.
Well, I think it's another classic Elstowism, isn't it? Black light, it doesn't exist, I guess.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's But that's about to happen, mate. Yeah. They're on you. They're proper. It's happening, mate.
So for the purposes of those listening, it's a slight breeze blowing into the swim, and you've got a glassy, calm area kicking off what look like two separate spots in the swim there. Maybe
Yeah, there's a group of fish out there eating.
Yeah, maybe a couple of them having a go.
Yeah. And
how exciting was it when you started to get those bleeds?
Oh, mate, you're just pacing about behind the rods waiting for it to go, drinking about 2 million cups of tea.
And presumably the bites would just like tip would pull down nice and slow and into the deep water, maybe.
Yeah. Tip would pull down. The bites are still savage, but yeah, tip would pull down.
This is the second capture of scaly two-tone.
Yeah, so that one.
Really see his two-tone side.
Yeah, I had to go to Peterborough Passport Office that day, and I caught Wolsey's mate. No, sorry, I caught Scaly Two-Tone before I went to the Passport Office, had my appointment at the Passport Office, came back, cast out, got a bite, and Rick Clements was in the pump. And as I got the bite, he went, "Wolsey's mate!" like that, shouted up the lake, and it was Wolsey's mate.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. Because I'd already caught that one. He knew Wolsey's mate was waiting to get caught.
Presumably this was ahead of an Ibiza trip, Dan. If you went the passport
I don't know what I was doing. What?
Right, Tobes, let's have a look. Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's go back to where that was slicking up, a bit higher up, and then the couple after that. That one. There's probably a landscape of that one. And that one, look at the
shape
mate.
of it, mate.
Now, unfortunately, the angle of the camera is a bit too wide angle.
You're right
the flash
on top of it,
is
on.
I'm right on the top of it. You know, not my greatest photography in the world. But what a carp. Right.
Again, the small head, like, it's had some tail damage, hasn't it? But an absolute,
just a weapon of a fish. Absolute weapon of a fish.
I bet he rooked. As well.
I reckon he did
that's
as
fairly
well.
safe to say.
But that's out of Alcatraz. That's probably just after that slicking.
Yeah, is that's morning? Is it down with the light
first
light
thing
on
in
the
morning.
the light on the back on the far side?
Yeah.
I think that's now an array of solar panels.
It is. There's
there's
about 87 million solar panels up on that ridge now. Not that you care because you can't see them because there's no water in that.
No one's going to fish there again, which is really
it's a real shame.
Mm.
Let's go back, Tobe, see if they're going to. The fish before was pretty special as well. They're both mid-30s, I think. That one.
Yeah, classic Elstow.
Yeah.
It's great that there are fish out there that you can identify as being very much from a lake.
Yes.
And a time.
Yes.
Because we're losing that, aren't we?
We are losing it, yeah, because we're all, and we're guilty of it as well, we're all buying off the same people. So we're all getting the same sort of look of fish, and everybody's, us included, is demanding fast growth, which they weren't really. I don't think the Elstow ones. Some were flyers,
but these have been in there since the 70s or something, haven't they?
I think so. Yeah. But even that one, you look at all the little tiny pearly scales around my fingers there, near the anal fin, and then just on the wrist of the tail. The picture does not do that justice at all. You could look at that carp, you could just stare at it for forever. You know. Just like mega shape, mega tails, just some of the best fish that I've ever fished for.
What's going to happen to your Elstows that you've got down into? Will those fish that are in your tank, will they end up in a lake? I mean,
yes,
they will.
100%. Yeah.
Can you breed from them? Is it? Are you going to try and
we can
keep
do
them
that.
a discrete strain?
Oh yeah. The ones that we've got growing on are being kept separate from everything else, so that they're not diluted, tainted. It's very Aryan, isn't it? But Steve, bless him, he's very particular about that, and I'm completely with him on it. I don't want to be blending them with anything else.
It's been a life's work for Steve, hasn't it?
It has been a life's work, and it's important for us older guys to bang on about this, so that the younger people want to retain their magical strains that they loved catching and that really mean something to them. Hopefully people will carry on doing it, you know. And there's a lot of that happening in the real special lakes that have got very unusual strains of fish. They are being bred on from spawn, kept on site, stocked back in the lakes, so that they're not bringing in farmed fish. And there's nothing wrong with farmed fish. We buy hundreds, if not thousands, of them every year, or we have done in the past. Certainly, we've slowed down a bit now because I've spent all the money. But you know, and I love them. And there's some amazing ones out there. They really are. You know,
and to be fair to those fish, Dan, we haven't seen them at their maturest state
No,
yet.
no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, Clive Gibbons sent me one that he caught from Baston Reedy the other day. Like, it's purple and it looks like one of them, and it's an amazing linear, you know. Yeah, and the young people coming through, they will be their Elstow fish, won't they? You know, and quite rightly so. They should be passionate about it. But yeah, if we can keep that look going, and a few of them can be spread around over time, then that would be lovely.
Yeah, and testament to the fact that you enjoyed your time so much on there is the fact that you want to keep some of that alive.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just the fish, was it, either? It was, for me, a lot of your fishing is very, you know, your performance is important and the way that you have to execute.
Yeah.
And that was a place that allowed you to indulge many of the finer points of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it just, like I said to you, I knew I was going to love it, and I loved it a million times more when I was there, because it rewarded effort, because you were rubbing shoulders with inspiring people, whether they wanted to be inspiring or not, they were inspiring, you know. So it honed your skills, or honed my skills. I think it hones everybody's skills as an angler. There's no doubt about it. The casting and everything, the precision and the rig tying and all that sort of thing. And yeah, it just some lakes you really click with, don't you? And other lakes, you know, we will talk about Welly on another podcast. I never really clicked with Welly, even though I caught a load of big ones out of there. I don't feel I ever smashed the living daylights out of it, but I came away from quite a few Elstow sessions thinking I've fished outside my own skin now. You know, like, I'm really pleased with what I caught, you know, and they were amazing carp that I've absolutely revelled in catching. And just everything about it. I just loved it. I just loved it, you know. So, it's and it continues to influence my fishing now, you know. And I wouldn't say, even if it had water in it and the fish were all still there, I don't think I'd go back, because I had my time, you know. And there's lots of other places I want to go, but you know, it is it's a special place, or it was a special place.
I think that's a good point to leave it, Dan. In fact, I was going to ask a question about how it influenced your fishing, but you covered it so well, mate. I think we'll leave it there, and hopefully we can get you back in short enough order and get the next one in the bag. Yeah,
well, I sort of do work in the building occasionally, so you will be able to. You'll be able to, you know, sort of tie me down a little bit sooner next time, and then we'll go through the Welly era. So yeah, thank you very much to all the Elstow boys that haven't berated me when they next see me over forgetting names and places and all that sort of thing. But yeah, it was a privilege to fish amongst them guys, and they have done and forever will do, had an effect on my fishing. So yeah, it was a special time.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.